Quick question. In your opinion, which anime or manga villain do you think was low-key justified in what they did? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Anyway, on to the video. Our story begins with some killer lore about the world. Humans fucked around with global warming and quickly found out. Sea levels rose, and continents sank one after another. Prosperous civilizations, the otaku lifestyle, and of course the hunt for Huz were no more. Humanity declined, and the world fell to ruin. Well, everything except marine life. For some reason, the creatures of the depths flourished, mutated, and eventually became the undisputed, horrifying kings of the world. Shifting scenes, we're introduced to an all-too-familiar ruined city and the main characters of our tragic tale. Under the watching eyes of the fishies and the once majestic cityscape, a duo of primal hunters make their entrance. The kid Bota and his unnamed father, who shall henceforth be addressed as Poppy, unpervertedly, of course. As expected of a father-son duo, the father is overly cautious, always warning his son to be careful. Bota, on the other hand, does his rebellious thing and tells his father to get off his back. He's always careful, so Poppy should stop nagging already. After bickering for a while, they finally make it to their targeted destination, a ruined Quick Mart. As expected from a relic of the past, the place is a dump, but it still holds treasures valuable to the destitute duo. Treasures quickly noticed by the observant Bota, a shit ton of canned food. Like a junkie getting his fix, Bota crashes out and starts stocking their cart. He takes everything, even the ones he struggles to recognize. Realizing Bota is struggling with his reading, and by extension, identifying the cans, Poppy calls him out, accusing him of neglecting his studies. Bota claps back, saying it's pointless. The world's already ruined, so when would he ever need that knowledge? Though saddened by the truth in his words, Poppy holds his ground, insisting it isn't pointless. He advises Bota to hit the books anyway. Just because it seems useless now doesn't mean it'll stay that way forever. Who knows when knowledge might come in handy? Bota says bet, and nods in reluctant understanding. He'll hit the books, so can Poppy stop nagging already? But boring topics aside, why was Poppy scavenging more forks? Didn't they already have enough at home? Or was this some fetish? Maybe freaky Poseidon Trident cosplay shit? What a horny dog. Poppy sighs and explains Bota's got it all wrong. He's just being cautious. Like he said, who knows when such things will come in handy? Better to collect now than regret later. Either way, they're about done, so it's time to get the hell out. Bota nods, and the duo hop onto the cart. Poppy pulls a lever, releasing the lifting bags. With their help, the duo float out of the city, leaving the ominous ruin behind. As they do, Bota reflects on the scenery from his perspective as a kid born after the fall. He's heard countless stories about the cities, how majestic and full of life they once were. But to him, they don't seem that grand. Just worn-out ruins, gloomy and hiding unspeakable horrors. He quickly casts his gaze away, leaving the underwater terror behind. After a bit more floating, the bags break the ocean surface, carrying the duo topside. They emerge close to a rundown fishing boat, their home in this apocalyptic world. Realizing they're back, the third member of the family, and another main character, calls out in delight. She reports the result of her scouting. Nothing of note. Poppy is disappointed but hides it from the kids. The real issue is clear. Nothing of note means no landmasses or safe places to dock nearby. It also means they'll have to keep drifting at sea indefinitely. Picking up on this, Bota asks if they'll ever meet other survivors. Poppy has always told them stories, but Bota can't help wondering if they're the only ones left alive. Lita, the little sister, chimes in too. Were they really the last ones? Had everyone else already joined their mother in heaven? Poppy smiles sadly and comforts them. He insists there are survivors out there, but the ocean is vast, making it hard to run into anyone. In any case, they have each other, and that's all they'll ever need. They'll continue to look after one another until they inevitably meet others. The kids nod, beaming as they promise to always look out for each other. Delighted, the trio set sail once more, continuing their endless journey deeper into the boundless sea. As they sail, we learn more about their life aboard the ship. Each has their duties. Poppy, the dad who never left to buy milk, handles hunting and maintenance, which might explain his fork obsession. though I'm still betting on a Poseidon Trident cosplay fetish. Bota is in charge of food and water. Lita handles laundry and cleaning. Dangerous tasks like ruin exploration are left to Poppy, but starting last year, he's been teaching Bota the ropes. He's shown him how to hunt near the surface and even brought him along on the safer ruin dives. That's how they've been surviving. Not ideal, but decent, considering the apocalypse. Ignoring the boredom of endless drifting, there are two things that get their hearts racing. First, the thrill of inspecting strange tools and trinkets scavenged from ruins. Second, a strict ironclad rule they must always follow. Never let nightfall catch you outside. As dusk falls and the sun begins to set, several alarms go off, warning the family of the incoming danger. They immediately drop everything and rush to the cabin. Realizing he forgot the fish, Bota tries to run back, but Poppy grabs him and shoves his head into the cabin, reminding him never to break the absolute rule. He follows them inside, slamming the door shut as the last of dusk disappears. An unnerving silence follows, broken only by the ticking of alarm clocks. The family huddles together, trying to use their bond to endure the deafening quiet. But as expected of an innocent kid, Lita breaks the silence, asking if she can hold the fish for comfort. The duo shush her sharply, warning her to stay silent. On the verge of tears, she's interrupted as the boat suddenly shakes, terrifying everyone. Acting fast, Poppy shields his kids, making sure no harm reaches them. It was also during this moment that we learned the real reason behind the absolute rule. The world was lost, no longer belonging to humans. It had been conquered by the creatures of the depths, mutated monsters that just so happened to be nocturnal. And nightfall is their hunting time. True to this fact, the monsters didn't hesitate to launch their assault. They rammed into the boat, shaking it and scaring the shit out of Bota and Lita. As the duo struggled to cope with the unnerving pressure and terror, a gentle arm wrapped around them, reassuring them in that troubling time. The arm was, of course, Poppy's. He smiled at them and told them not to worry. He would always protect them. As for the monsters, they shouldn't worry about them too much. They were only curious, rocking the boat a little before inevitably leaving. And so the three held each other, clinging to their bond until the monsters finally left. Sweeter still was the fact that Poppy never once let go of his kids through it all. Now that's a father right there. A true Poppy. Completely unlike your own, who went to buy milk and never came back. Damn. Fast forward a little later, and things were finally calm in their floating abode. Under the silent ticking of the clocks, the kids, exhausted and stressed from the encounter, were laid to rest by their diligent Poppy. Compelled by curiosity, Bota asked if Poppy's home had ever been attacked by sea monsters, because how else could he explain his knowledge and calmness during such a terrifying ordeal? Poppy replied that it had, but that was common on the vast sea. Since the entire world was covered in water and sea monsters lived everywhere, the same could be said for literally anywhere else. Still, it wasn't as scary as Bota imagined, because they had harpoonists. Hearing this strange new word, Bota perked up with interest. He asked what harpoonists were, some kind of noble maiden hunters? Maybe legendary huzz-whisperers? Poppy chuckled and replied that harpoonists were great warriors, not warriors of the cheeks, but of the streets. Well, technically the ocean, since the streets were now down under. Their duty was to slay sea monsters and protect their homes. Noticing Bota's growing excitement, Poppy revealed that he himself was one too, a mighty harpoonist, marked by the tattoo he bore, the true sign of his craft. Bota beamed in surprise and asked about the 6 strange dots under it. Poppy corrected him, saying they weren't dots but stars. Seeing Bota's confusion, he realized the kids had never seen the night sky before. They always hid indoors at dusk. Saddened by this, he decided to describe it. A black canvas with millions upon billions of bright jewels scattered across it. Beyond beautiful. He hoped his kids would see it one day. As he spoke, Bota finally succumbed to exhaustion and passed out. Poppy was left staring at them, love and nostalgia written on his face. Meanwhile, we get a clue about the world's current apocalypse. Something, or someone, had raptured the moon, shattering a huge chunk of that bastard into pieces. The next day, the extent of the monster's rampage finally became clear. Their week's worth of fish was gone, devoured whole. The boat was a wreck, ransacked and ravaged to near oblivion. Still, The family was alive, and that was what truly mattered to Poppy. Bota wasn't so convinced. He pointed at a strange mark on the deck. That didn't look like luck. It looked like a warning, as if the creature had claimed the territory. Poppy dismissed the thought. To him, it was just a week's worth of repairs and hard work, nothing more. Exploiting the moment, Bota asked if he could venture into the ruins to help, since Poppy would be busy with repairs anyway. But Poppy immediately shut that bullshit down. He sharply reprimanded him, telling him not to even think about it. The sea was full of monsters. What gave him the impression he'd allow something so risky? Bota shot back, pointing out the previous day's adventure. Hadn't Poppy let him join then? What was the difference between that and another dive? Poppy replied that he was mistaken. That hadn't been a casual dive. He had ensured things were safe beforehand before letting Bota into the water. Matter of fact, he didn't even know why they were arguing. He was the father, and his word was law. Staring sternly at his kids, he laid down a new rule. Both siblings were forbidden from ruin hunting until they were at least 17. Bota exploded at the absurdity. He yelled at his father, insisting he was old enough to do whatever he wanted. Poppy shot back that it was for his safety. Harsh, maybe, but it was what was best for him. Besides, the ban was only on ruins. He could take him anywhere else, whenever. Bota wasn't buying that gaslighting bullshit. What did Poppy mean wherever? They were on an endless ocean. There was nothing out there but water. They were trapped on this goddamn boat, just like a goldfish trapped in its jar. How could he call that living? Just as the two were about to square up for real, Lita called out, pointing at something. A flock of seagulls. That meant land nearby. Their squabble ended instantly as they chased after the birds, eventually finding a dilapidated building. Spotting fleeting shadows behind its windows, the kids got excited and called out, announcing their arrival to the entire structure. Poppy quickly shut them up and told them to hide. Grabbing his weapon, he instructed them to stay put while he checked it out. Before leaving, he gave Bota a final warning. If anything happened to him, he was to turn the boat around and leave. Confused, Bota asked if Poppy planned to fight the survivors. Poppy replied that it was possible, depending on how they reacted, whether they were good or evil. With that, he dove into the sea, swimming toward the ruin. After a few powerful backstrokes, he reached the building. Up close, it looked more daunting than he'd expected, but he wasn't a bitch, so he manned up and headed inside. Exploring the ruin, he found a partial staircase. Scaling the crumbling steps, he reached the first floor and a closed door. The silence was suffocating. He could hear his own heartbeat. But he pushed through the ominous feeling and opened the door. Behind it, corpses. Lots of them. His breath caught, and he staggered back in shock. Were these the survivors they'd hoped to find? If so, what killed them? Meanwhile, back on the boat, the kids were oblivious to the danger. They bantered, hopeful about meeting survivors, until Bota noticed a silhouette in the water. A man, drowning, calling for help. Naively, he rushed to rescue him. At the same time, inside the building, Poppy made another discovery. A box containing 2 antique explosives. Curious about where they came from and what they were meant for, he barely had time to wonder before spotting something else. A giant hole in the wall. The steel bars were bent inward. Something had attacked from the outside, forcing its way in. Worse, the deep scars on the walls were identical to the ones on their ship. Poppy froze, then bolted. His kids were in danger. He dove back into the sea, swimming furiously for the boat. When he arrived, he called out to Lita, asking where Bota was. The snitch didn't hold back. She spilled everything. Bota had gone to rescue someone. Poppy looked toward the survivor. One glance was enough to know the truth. This was a trap. That thing wasn't human. Realizing it had been exposed, the abomination fled underwater, leaving only faint ripples. Confused, Bota asked why it ran. Was it scared? Poppy replied that it wasn't scared, and it hadn't run. On the contrary, it was right below them. Terrified, he pulled his kids close, ready to use himself as a shield. Below the surface, the truth loomed. The monstrous sea demon had its sights on them. Without hesitation, it lunged, chomping the fishing boat straight out of the water, Its jaws clamped down on the hull, tearing through wood and metal alike. With a final wrench, it ripped the boat to pieces before turning its attention to the three on deck. It glared at them, etching its disturbing visage deep into their memories. Terrified, the family huddled together and screamed, "What the fuck was that?" "That, my dear Bota and Poppy, is a jacked-up sea monster with some killer dental work. Dental work it used to easily smash their ship." Caught up in the onslaught, the family of three barely clung to each other to avoid being tossed overboard. But the monster wasn't satisfied. It slammed directly into the sea. The force sent the family reeling, and they narrowly avoided death by clinging to one half of the already destroyed ship. Unfortunately, that was as far as their luck could carry them. When they recovered from the relentless barrage, they were horrified to see a shadow zooming toward them. It was the lightning-fast tail of the sea monster, which whipped through the air and obliterated their last safe ground. The family was sent flying, crashing brutally into the dilapidated building. Unsatisfied with the carnage, the sea monster streaked through the waves, closed the distance, and relentlessly circled the building to press the attack. It left no room for the family to escape amidst its ruthless pursuit. Meanwhile, things weren't looking too good on their end. When he finally came to, Bota found the trio battered, bruised, and barely clinging to life at the edge of the crumbling structure. The only one in slightly better shape was their father, who still held them in his arms, protecting them despite the horrendous turn of events. Noticing the unconscious Lita, Bota panicked and asked if she was okay. Poppy replied that she was fine, just passed out from the shock. A little rest, and she'd be golden. Still, he was grateful they'd survived. He didn't know what he would have done if he'd lost them in that fight. Initially relieved they'd miraculously survived, Bota noticed something that made his skin crawl. His father wasn't doing as well as he claimed. In fact, his injuries were worse than theirs. A freaking metal rod had impaled him, likely because he'd dedicated everything to protecting them, completely disregarding his own safety. Panicked, Bota asked if there was anything he could do. Poppy was losing hella blood after all. Poppy brushed it off, insisting he'd be fine, that a little stab wasn't much. But the twitch in his lips betrayed the bravado. Still, now wasn't the time for bullshit. He told Bota to grab Lita and run. He would leave her in his care for a while. Bota wanted to argue, but Poppy silenced him quickly. Patting his son's head, he reassured him warmly. There was nothing to be afraid of. He'd be right behind them. Helpless, Bota grabbed Lita and ran, all while under his father's watchful eyes. Poppy watched them disappear into the distance before finally turning his attention to his own predicament. The rod lodged in his body. Like the true embodiment of "I'm him," Poppy ignored the devastating pain and pulled himself free. He lifted himself off the rod, enduring the agonizing bone-deep pain. Halfway through, however, he noticed something that made his dire situation even worse. The monster was done fucking around and was coming in for seconds. It moved with lightning speed, appearing before Poppy in an instant. Donning the same creepy, twisted expression, the sea monster glared at him, its grimy, gigantic teeth inching closer. Its rancid breath washed over his face, overwhelming him with a foul stench. He wanted to close his eyes in disgust but forced them open, and noticed something peculiar. Despite being a creature of the depths, one clearly vulnerable to sunlight, it ignored the burning sensation and pursued them anyway. Why? What had they done, or stumbled upon, that made it so relentless? Something was clearly off. The sea monster ignored his jumble of thoughts and zeroed in on him, its focus shifting to the rod nailing him down. Sensing something amiss, Poppy reached for his sword, but was caught off guard by a twist. Instead of attacking him, the beast ignored him and turned toward Bota and Lita. Its intentions were clear: target the weaker ones first. Without hesitation, it whipped its tail toward the kids. The move was insanely fast, leaving Bota no room to dodge. Sensing the danger, he jumped forward, barely escaping the strike. Enraged, the sea monster dropped everything and commenced a frantic pursuit. It charged through the structure, drawing closer and closer to the fleeing Bota. As it did, it opened its maw wide, preparing to swallow him whole. Judging by the jagged rows of teeth lining its mouth, that would be a hell of a way to go. Predictably, Bota wanted no part of that smoke. He seized the first chance he got, sprinted up the stairs, and hurled himself into the building, narrowly escaping the closing maw. When it realized its second attack hadn't worked, the monster didn't relent. It launched a third. Through the gaps in the dilapidated building, it sent out a toothy tentacle, probing for its target. Bota, surprisingly quick on his feet, weaved through the strikes, always staying just out of reach. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. Lita stirred awake, and the noise drew the monster's attention. Bota immediately covered her mouth, but the damage was done. The tentacle closed in, following the sound. Without hesitation, it curled into a spike and shot forward, narrowly missing him. Bota could only endure for so long before being forced out of cover, frantically dodging and rolling to avoid certain death. Through a fortunate turn of events, he rolled into a narrow cranny, using it to withstand the attacks. Finally, the barrage ceased, leaving the room in an unnerving silence. Peering through the thick dust, Bota saw something that made his heart leap. It was his father, alive and well after pulling himself free from the impaling rod. Or so he thought. Turns out it was just an illusion, a nasty hunting camouflage deployed by the sea monster to lure him out. As soon as it confirmed his position, it dropped the act, uncurled like nightmare fuel, and reverted back to its disgusting tentacle form. Wrapping around Bota, it dragged him out of the building. He resisted, but his small body stood no chance against such a behemoth. The child was captured and delivered directly to the monster's waiting maw. Sensing death, Bota didn't play hero. He screamed desperately for his father. Of course, Poppy didn't disappoint. He ripped himself free, charged the monster, and slashed its tentacle apart, setting Bota loose. Grabbing hold of his son, he stabbed the monster's flank and slid down its body as crimson blood spurted in his wake. Landing, he hid Bota behind him, entered a fighting stance, and shouted at the monster to stop fucking around. How dare it go after his son? It would pay for that with its life. The monster said, "Bet," and stepped forward, towering menacingly over Poppy, pressing down with its overwhelming aura. Poppy didn't back down. He rose to the challenge, first instructing Bota to hide before turning his full focus to the beast. That's when he realized something he'd overlooked this whole time. This bastard sea monster was massive. Easily the biggest he'd ever seen. Maybe even bigger than Skutum, the sea devil he'd fought before. Nevertheless, retreat wasn't an option. Backing down meant his children would die, and that was something he refused to allow. Steeling his resolve, he unsheathed his sword and charged. Arriving before the behemoth, he dodged its swiping claw and slashed across its arm. Unsatisfied, he entered a frenzy, hacking relentlessly into its hide. Sword wounds bloomed like grotesque flowers, fountains of blood sputtering from the gashes. Frenzied by pain, the monster tried to slam him, but Poppy dodged, anticipating the counter. Exploiting the opening, he ran up its body, lunging for a devastating blow. Without hesitation, he drove his blade deep into its skull, then slid down its back, carving a nasty gash into its flesh. Finally, he disengaged, somersaulting away, careful not to push his luck. Unfortunately, his retreat wasn't fast enough. The monster's tail whipped him, hurling him into a nearby wall. The crash knocked the wind out of him, and he coughed up blood. Watching the carnage, Bota panicked and cried out for his father. Shit, what was he supposed to do? He had no ability to intervene in a fight of this magnitude, especially against a big-boned, love-handle-having behemoth of this caliber. Luckily, his intervention was unnecessary. Poppy had shit covered. His eyes darted and locked onto a dangling hoist line. Without a shred of hesitation, he seized it, slashed it free, and the recoil catapulted him skyward, just in time to dodge the sea monster's savage attack. Twisting midair with insane grace, he latched onto a colossal metal tube, wrapping around it like a cracked-up gymnast. The beast roared and lunged again, its maw gaping wide in a merciless follow-up strike. Realizing the danger he was in, Poppy opted for a desperate gamble. He pulled on the metal tube, yanking it free with considerable effort. Without pause, he leveled the tube at the sea monster and drove it forward, stabbing through its mouth in a sputter of blood and gore. Watching from the sideline, Bota instinctively flashed a triumphant smile. He was doing it. His father was actually clapping sea monster cheeks. He had no idea his old man was that formidable. Truly amazing. Meanwhile, the great battle against the sea monster raged on. It slammed into the nearby wall, hoping to shake Poppy off, but the man was like a clingy ex refusing to let go no matter what. Through considerable effort, luck, and perfect timing, Poppy tricked the sea beast into impaling its lower jaw. The wound forced its mouth open, preventing it from shutting, and giving Poppy the perfect opportunity to launch a relentless barrage. Of course, he didn't waste it. He immediately went to town, stabbing frenziedly, poking holes in every patch of flesh he could reach. Blood sputtered like rivers as the sea monster's wail bellowed, only to be drowned out by Poppy's war cry amidst the flood of gore. Just as things seemed to be going perfectly, tragedy struck. The metal tube snapped. Completely caught off guard, Poppy barely had time to react before the monster's jaws clamped shut on him, its teeth boring holes through his flesh. The sudden shift left him flabbergasted. He instinctively coughed up blood in horror, wondering what the hell had just happened. On the sidelines, Bota was equally terrified. Things had been going so well. So what the fuck just happened? He flicked a worried look toward his father, silently asking if he was okay. But Poppy returned only a regretful glance, his worry leagues above Bota's. Ever since they were little, he'd always been worrying about them. When Bota went on solo dives and took too long to resurface, Poppy's heart felt like it would pound out of his chest. Only he knew the fear and eventual relief that came with confirming their safety. During the nights, when sea monsters harassed them relentlessly, he always held them close, comforted them, and reassured them with a big smile. But the truth was, he had always been more terrified than they were. The fear of losing them, of not being able to protect them, scared the shit out of him. Nightmares haunted him constantly. Unfortunately, fate was a fickle mistress, and the bitch always came calling. Though reluctant, it was time to let them go. His lips parted in a resigned smile as he told Bota he loved them. He loved them very much. Without hesitation, he hurled his blade toward Bota and grabbed an explosive from his bag. Through clenched teeth, he uttered his last words, asking his son to take care of his sister. Then he detonated the explosive, obliterating both the monster and himself in a fiery blast. Caught in the aftermath, Bota was flung back by the shockwave, slamming hard into the wall. Meanwhile, the sea beast slowly sank, the gaping hole in its mouth proving just how dead it was. Before long, the depths reclaimed it, its corpse disappearing into the pitch-black darkness. Struggling to his feet, Bota shakily approached the churning sea. He wanted to believe his father had survived, but the bloody water left no room for doubt. Tears welled in his eyes as they landed on the last remnants of his father's sacrifice, his broken glasses. He couldn't deny it anymore. Poppy was truly gone, and they were now all alone. A hoarse, broken wail escaped his lips as he cried out for his father. We shift scenes to a dark and foggy night. Surprisingly, the fishing boat the family called home was still intact and afloat, untouched by the monster's rampage. On the deck stood a puzzled Bota, looking around urgently for his family. After some searching, his attention was drawn to sorrowful sobs. Following the sound, he found Lita crouched in a corner, crying into her arms. Concerned, Bota asked what was wrong and where their father was. Why was she hiding and sobbing so ominously? Lita didn't reply. Instead, she wordlessly pointed toward the ocean, toward a bloody corpse floating on the waves. Upon careful observation, Bota was horrified to realize it was his father's mangled body, torn apart in a tragic death. Panic overwhelmed him, and he made a beeline for the gunnels, ready to dive in. But Lita stopped him, begging him not to go, not to leave her behind. Furious, Bota wanted to shout at her, to reprimand her for stopping him. But his words froze in his throat at the horrifying sight before him. Lita was long dead. All that remained was a ghoulish creature that growled and glared back at him with hollow eyes. The sight scared the shit out of him, and he jolted awake. It had all been a nightmare. Quite some time had passed since the tragedy. It was already nighttime. Staring to the side, he found comfort in Lita's peaceful sleeping face. But the weight of reality crushed him once again. They were truly alone. Tears welled in his eyes as he thought about his father and how foolish he'd been. He had always argued with him, called him overprotective and nagging. But that had only been childish naivety. The truth was, his father had been protecting them every single day, against the sea, against the monsters, against everything. And now, he was gone. It was Bota's responsibility to protect his sister. Steeling himself, he held Lita close, just as Poppy had once done. Fast forward to the next morning. The kids' struggle for survival officially began. Luckily, things started relatively well. They found their small boat, still intact, with supplies stored inside. Delighted, Bota called out to his sister, telling her to stop lazing around and help him. But a quick glance showed the gloomy aura clinging to her. Lita didn't mince words. She asked directly, where was their father? Why wasn't he there? Had he died and gone to their mother? Taken aback, Bota didn't know how to respond. Should he tell her the truth? Was she even ready to hear it? Unsure, he simply hugged her, and they both cried into each other's arms. Eventually, the tears stopped, and the two got back to business, scavenging through supplies. When they found the alarm clock, Lita asked if they should keep it. Bota, however, had lost all faith in the damn thing. Since the monster had attacked them in broad daylight, the clock was useless. Best to toss it into the sea. Just then, Lita's stomach growled loudly, interrupting his rant. When he asked if she was hungry, she denied it. But the second, louder growl proved she was bullshitting. Embarrassed, Lita blushed and insisted she was fine. Bota reminded her she didn't need to pretend. They could just catch fish to eat. Rummaging through their supplies for something to use as a fishing rod, Bota realized their harpoon gun had been destroyed. He'd need a replacement. Just as he was about to move on to another box, the loud clatter of falling forks drew his attention. It reminded him of Poppy's words, that they'd come in handy someday. Well, the old man had been right. Wiping his tears, Bota manned the hell up and tied a fork to a rod, creating a makeshift harpoon. Not ideal, but it would do. When he headed for the water, the sea's dark, gloomy appearance made him pause. He had always been carefree, but recent events had left him traumatized. What if the monster was still alive? The once serene sea now looked terrifying. As he debated, Lita grabbed him desperately, begging him not to go. What if the monster came back? Seeing the fear in her eyes, Bota stepped back. Truth was, he was already scared, and now he had a legit reason to chicken out. Backing away, his eyes fell on a crab just chilling nearby. Fast forward. Poor Crab and his maiden were soon roasting over a campfire, their dinner for the night. When the food was ready, Bota gave everything to Lita, keeping nothing for himself. Confused, she asked why he wasn't eating. He claimed he wasn't hungry, but his stomach betrayed him with a loud growl. Delighted and oblivious, Lita dug in, savoring every bite. Meanwhile, Bota was stressing the fuck out. Food was one thing, but they had no drinking water. He needed a plan. Fortunately, it rained that night, letting him collect some. But a sustainable solution was necessary. Then he remembered Poppy teaching him how to harvest drinking water from seawater. An idea struck. He set up a do-it-yourself experiment, evaporating seawater and collecting the condensation. Slow and torturous, but it worked. When the first drops of drinkable water slid into their container, the siblings rejoiced. At the very least, they wouldn't die of thirst. The thought greatly settled Bota, who'd been stressing the fuck out. At least with this, plus all the valuable knowledge he'd learned from Poppy, the duo finally had a decent chance of survival. He quickly perked up, ready to explore the whole building island. Since they were going to live there, possibly for the foreseeable future, it was paramount that he knew everything about it. Know thy neighbor and all that shit. Assuming thy neighbors weren't human-eating sea monsters, of course. Determined to be useful, Lita asked to tag along. Bota agreed, and the duo entered the building once again. Scaling the broken stairs, they eventually made it to the abandoned room on the first floor, the same room Poppy had explored earlier. Just like their father, the curious duo entered the room, and the sight greatly surprised them. Especially the rotting corpses on the floor, which, for some reason, looked way more ghastly and disturbing than before, making their faces turn ashen. Lita didn't hide her fear, and immediately clung to Bota for comfort. The older brother, though equally terrified, feigned composure to reassure his sister. Unfortunately, his trembling wasn't fooling anyone. The dude was scared as fuck. Calming his nerves, he told Lita not to worry about the corpses. They must have been the previous tenants of the building. For now, their only priority was to scour the room and collect anything of value. Lita said bet, and although the corpses still scared her, she kept it hidden and helped Bota rummage through the room, discovering some dusty, worn-out blankets in the process. Meanwhile, Bota searched through the more dangerous-looking items. He eventually found a gas tank, which at first he confused for a water container. Thinking it stored drinkable water, he was quickly corrected by the strong smell and the amazing high he got from the fumes. Though reluctant, he sniffed the gas a couple more times before finally letting it go. Next, his eyes landed on a mysterious wooden crate on the ground. Upon closer inspection, he discovered a single explosive packed neatly inside. He soon identified it as the same kind of explosive Poppy had used to wipe out the sea monster in a fiery blast. Thinking about his father, Bota instinctively felt a sense of inadequacy. Would he ever be able to fight as gloriously as him? Clap sea monster cheeks as cleanly as him? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. He had to give it his all. He had to protect his sister. If he didn't, their fates would be like the corpses lying in that room, dead and forgotten. Locking in, Bota officially began his preparations. First, he improved the makeshift harpoon before turning his sights on Poppy's sword. Since they'd be living there for a while, he would need the harpoon to catch fish, and the sword would be his best reassurance in case sea monsters attacked. Best believe he'd be ready for some cheek sauté the next time they did. Fiddling with the sword, he discovered an inconspicuous knob. Flicking it released a surging gas that unsheathed the blade and drove it forward. Before Bota could react, the surge intensified, yanking him forward relentlessly. He barely had time to process what was happening before he crashed brutally into a column, his nose bloody and mangled from the blow. Teasing, Lita asked if he was crying. Bota vehemently denied it, saying real men don't cry. Lita, however, replied that he wasn't a man then, because he was crying like a bitch right now. But that aside, he should follow her. She'd found something interesting. Hiding his embarrassment, Bota wiped his tears and obediently followed along, all the way to a rusted door on the floor. Puzzled, he asked why she'd brought him there. Wasn't that just a normal door? Upon careful observation, however, he discovered it was a hidden entrance into the basement. Curious, he decided to head down and check it out. After instructing Lita to stay put and keep watch, he grabbed his harpoon and made his way downstairs. Although initially confident, his bravery quickly waned as the pitch darkness slowly encroached. He couldn't help but wonder if it was truly wise to head into such an ominous place. Still, he'd already come that far, so turning back wasn't an option. Just as he was weighing his options, whether to risk it or say fuck it and leave, a huge fish jumped out of the water, surprising the hell out of him. Through careful observation, he realized that fish wasn't alone. A whole school of them had made the place their home. Delighted, he quickly jumped into the water and began his hunt. With fish so large and numerous, they wouldn't have to worry about food anymore. Plus, they had water, meaning they had everything they needed to survive. Extremely optimistic and cheerful, Bota continued his hunt, determined to catch as many fish as he could. He planned to have a feast that night to celebrate this unexpected windfall. However, just as Lady Luck seemed to be flashing our boy, giving him a tease of them stockings, tragedy suddenly struck. The water became ominously dark, and round, grotesque balls started appearing out of nowhere. Curious, and with zero survival instinct, Bota touched one to investigate. That was when the grim reality became apparent. The balls were actually monster eggs, and there were a shit ton of them everywhere. He had unknowingly entered a nest, and the worst had yet to emerge. The egg he'd touched suddenly shook, and cracks appeared on its surface. A hand jetted out, reaching for his neck. Terrified, Bota said fuck that and made a run for it. He swam with all his might, ignoring the unceasing hatching of monster eggs around him. Unfortunately, he hadn't fled far when a sea monster caught up to him, grabbing his leg. The little bastard didn't hesitate and immediately chomped down. Bota, clearly still in need of said leg, said hell no and struck first. He thrust the harpoon forward, stabbing deep into the monster's eye. Overwhelmed by the pain, the beast let go and flailed around like a bitch. Its reaction gave Bota the perfect opportunity to slip away, and slip he did. Soon, he left the gloomy waters behind, along with the monsters slumbering there. But he wasn't out of danger yet. in a show of true ferocity and loathing uncharacteristic of a mere beast. The sea monster glared at him, its thirst for revenge evident. Bota, however, didn't care. He just kept fleeing. When he emerged from the water, he instinctively heaved a sigh of relief, though his nerves were still on high alert. He planned to flee up the stairs, but a claw jetting from the water stopped him in his tracks. Before long, the monster clawed its way up and revealed its grotesque form. It was the same sea monster he'd stabbed, clearly furious, having spun the block to take revenge on his ass. Terrified, Bota scurried back, swinging his sword wildly to keep the monster at bay. But the beast ignored it and lunged forward, fangs bared to swallow him whole. Bota acted quickly, jumping to the side and avoiding an early reunion with Poppy. He didn't stick around to check its condition, just turned and ran as fast as he could. Soon, he made it to ground level and decisively shut the basement door. For added security, he even stomped on it, using his weight to press it down. Unfortunately, even that wasn't enough to deter the vengeful beast. It clawed at the door, tearing through it like a hot knife through butter. Seeing this, Bota yelled, "Watch this," and stabbed downward, plunging his sword into the door, and hopefully into the monster's flesh below. A sudden quiet blanketed the room, leaving Bota wondering. Had he actually done it? Had he taken down that hateful creature? He opted not to risk it and deployed extra measures. With effort, he gathered rubble and piled it on top of the door. Not entirely safe, but better than nothing. Gassed out, he suddenly remembered something he'd overlooked the entire time. Where the hell was Lita? Worried, he called for her, frantically searching through the building. But all he heard in return was deafening silence. Scared out of his wits, he bolted for the exit, hoping to God Lita was out there, safe and alive. He quickly exited the building, spotted Lita, and instinctively exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Luckily, she was safe, and that's all he cared about. Calling out, he warned her to stay away from the water, emphasizing that it wasn't safe. But Lita ignored him, still staring into the distance. Anxious, he moved closer and asked what was wrong. What was she looking at? Lita simply pointed to the sea and told him to look. Following her gaze, he spotted a silhouette off in the distance, eerily similar to the illusion the sea monster had shown. Terrified, Bota almost shit his pants. He knew it. That bastard wasn't dead. It had clearly come back for revenge. Come back to swallow them whole. Fuck. Before he could suppress his horror and figure out a suitable solution, Lita shocked him by jumping into the boat and swiftly paddling away. With an ecstatic expression, she told Bota that was their dad. He had finally come back for them. Clearly terrified and a little taken aback by Lita's childish naivety, Bota screamed for her to come back, warning that that wasn't their father. But before he could say more, the urgent ticking of the alarm clocks drew his attention, making his already pale face even paler. Just as they say, when it rains, it pours. Well, fate decided to bitch-slap Bota once again by adding an extra layer of difficulty to his already perilous situation. The alarm clocks rang, warning that dusk was approaching, and with the sunset came the harrowing monsters of the depths. Aware of this, Bota didn't hesitate to jump into the sea, desperately pursuing his runaway sister. He tore through the increasingly dark waters, ignoring the ominous ticking of the alarm clocks above him. However, there was one thing he couldn't ignore no matter what, and that was the sea monsters exiting their nests, finally awake in line with their nocturnal nature. Terrified, Bota watched the ugly, big-eyed, fanged, and low-key jacked up like Jim Bros sea monsters, unsure what to do next. He knew he wasn't a match for them, but was escape even possible at this point? Suppressing the unease in his heart, he decided to do the only thing he could for now: rescue his sister. Emerging from the water, he grabbed hold of the boat's line and pulled it towards an abandoned pillar. Though not entirely suitable to weather the incoming storm, it was better than facing the sea monsters in their watery domain. Besides, the island structure was too far away, and Bota was certain they wouldn't make it back in time. Helping Lita up, he was about to climb in as well when a sea monster targeted his legs. The vicious beast charged at him, its nasty fangs inches away from his feet. Sensing the danger, Bota swung himself upward, barely avoiding the sea monster's ghastly chomp. He hung on for dear life, enduring the dizzying shaking as the monster vented its missed opportunity. When it finally realized it wasn't going to capture its prey with such uncouth tactics, the sea beast reluctantly dove back into the sea. As for Bota, he was literally shitting his pants, especially when he noticed just how many of those vermin were gunning for them. Desperate, Bota racked his brain for a solution. The island structure was right there, but reaching it meant they had to dive into the sea. Even a lunatic would know that wasn't a good idea. The sea monsters would attack them the second they entered their territory. So, what should they do? Before he could mull it over, a sea monster attacked the structure, shaking it and almost flinging them into the sea. This undoubtedly drew Bota's attention as he discovered a grim reality. The building structure, the same sanctuary they were relying on to stay alive, was collapsing. The stony bastard wasn't going to last for long, and when it did collapse, well, the outcome was obvious. They'd be cooked. Despairing, Bota had thoughts of giving up. He was but a young boy. What could he possibly do in the face of such overwhelming foes? However, a quick thought of Poppy and the last task he left for him snapped him back to his senses. Their dad had given his life for them, bled for them. How dare he give up so easily? Was he a bitch or something? Nah, to hell with that. Even if he was going down, he'd definitely bring down one of those bastards with him. Energized by his resolve, he wielded his blade against a lunging sea beast, his arms swinging in resolute defiance. He slashed down, activating the gas propellant, and cleanly sliced a sea beast in half. The monster collapsed in a flood of blood and sickly gore, dyeing the sea crimson. Whereas Bota, the Reaper of Life, stood frozen, disbelieving of his glorious feat. Before he could dwell on it, however, two more sea beasts lunged at him, successfully executing a sneak attack. Luckily, Bota acted fast, swinging his sword in a counterattack. He clipped one sea monster, causing it to crash into the other in a double strike. Unfortunately, the glorious feat also caused the structure to crumble, leaving them tumbling down straight towards the murky sea. Reacting quickly, Bota grabbed hold of Lita, braced himself, and decisively jumped from the structure. He abandoned the crumbling pillar, soared through the air, and accurately landed onto their tiny boat. Just as he was about to heave a soft sigh from escaping their first predicament, a sputter of blood suddenly splashed, drawing their attention. The blood was from the other sea monsters, who had discovered their fallen kin and were viciously cannibalizing it. Though the sight was repulsive and straight-up disgusting, Bota couldn't help but be glad about the monster's savage nature. At least this way, they'd have enough time to escape. Snapping Lita out of her traumatized trance, he told her to paddle. They'd use this opportunity to slip away. Lita said bet, swallowed that spinach like Popeye, and immediately let them guns fly. The duo paddled like crazy, breaths ragged as they slowly inched away from the feasting sea monsters. Unfortunately, the beasts quickly noticed their escape and gave chase. They pursued the kids relentlessly, narrowing the gap between them in an instant. Realizing this, Bota put more back into it and soon reached the island structure. He didn't dally by the sea. Instead, he grabbed Lita and jetted into the building. Upon arriving, their next hurdle soon became apparent. They had to climb a flight of sketchy stairs, all while being pursued by a nest of hungry sea monsters. Despite this, Bota grit his teeth and pushed Lita onto the first step. He told her to keep moving. He would find a way to cover her retreat. Saying so, he raised his sword and slashed it at the steps. His aim was to sever them and block the sea monster's pursuit. But he'd gravely underestimated the thickness of the steps. They weren't things he could break in a short time, especially with a nest of sea beasts after him. Nevertheless, Bota ignored the odds and kept hacking. His relentless attacks drew the monster's attention, and they quickly closed in on him. Bota, on the other hand, didn't relent and desperately kept slashing. He unleashed all his pent-up frustration on the steps, hacking at them like a deranged psycho. Regrettably, despite his best efforts, he wasn't quick enough to finish before the sea beasts caught up to him. The little bastards clawed at him, forcing Bota to retreat in a frenzy. Meanwhile, the sea monsters weren't the types to give up easily. They pursued Bota up the stairs, their Herculean bodies hanging from the steps. Finally, in a stroke of genuine bad luck, Bota tripped and fell, opening himself up for an attack from behind. The blow cut deep, sputtering blood and causing Bota to scream in agony. He wanted to turn back and counterattack, But that became unnecessary when the steps finally gave way, crumbling with a resounding crack. The unexpected change caught the sea monsters off guard, and all of them tumbled to the ground, helpless as they glared at the kids, just inches from their reach. Meanwhile, Bota and Lita finally let out the turbid breath they'd been holding in. At least for now, they seemed to be safe, although the sea monsters' relentless pursuit still sent a shiver down their spines. Waiting and observing no unfavorable changes, Bota finally exclaimed in joy. They'd made it. They'd escaped those damned bastards. Lita, however, was more concerned about his back. That wound looked hella deep after all. Bota told her not to worry about it. Such a tiny scratch couldn't do shit to him. For now, they should head inside and wait for the sun to rise. He moved to lead Lita into their temporary camp, only to halt at the sight before him. A towering sea monster had been lying in ambush, waiting for them to fall into its trap. Worst part? It was the same vindictive bastard from before. Wasting no time, the sea beast attacked, pinning Bota to the ground. It then chomped at him, its nasty fangs inching toward his head. Bota screamed in panic and held on, barely keeping the sharp fangs from sinking into him. But judging by the trembling in his arms and the growing despair in his gaze, it was obvious he couldn't hold on for long. Just as things were getting desperate, Lita jumped in, stabbing the sea monster in the eye. She stepped back trembling, her hands bloody as she told the beast to let go of her brother. Enraged, the sea monster lashed out, clawing at her with fury. Luckily, it was blind, so its attacks fell short of reaching the terrified child. Bota, however, wasn't as lucky, as he got clipped by a stray strike. The blow sent him flying, whining and screaming like a bitch. With one obstacle out of its way, the sea monster turned its focus to Lita. Since its sight was getting blurrier by the second, it decided to use a different method to locate the troublesome kid who blinded it. Sniffing the air, it locked onto Lita's scent and followed the smell to the wall. Its jagged fangs opened with a menacing growl as it slowly closed in on her. Meanwhile, the little girl was trapped and terrified, helpless to stop her demise. She called out to her brother, begging him to save her. Bota, being the reliable brother he was, didn't disappoint. He smacked the gas tank, drawing the sea monster's attention. When that wasn't enough, he spanked that bastard even harder, finally forcing the beast to ignore Lita and charge at him. Having predicted this, Bota met the sea monster head-on. He hurled the gas tank into its mouth before dodging to the side in a narrow escape. Caught off guard by the insidious counterattack, the sea monster chugged down the fuel before it could even process the mess it had gotten itself into. Of course, Bota wasn't going to let that opportunity slip by. He quickly recovered, grabbed his sword, and faced off against the idiotic sea monster, which was still dousing itself in gas. Without mercy or hesitation, he swung his sword, yelling for the beast to die. The blade sliced through rubble and metal rods, producing sparks that flew toward the soaked sea monster. Flames unfurled like blossoms, and the once mighty creature was set ablaze, its agonized shriek thundering across the room. Satisfied with the outcome, Bota grabbed Lita and made a run for it. He dashed toward a ladder, aiming to escape the fire by climbing to the roof. However, halfway through the climb, the flames became the least of Bota's worries. In a genuine stroke of bad luck, the sea beast knocked over the explosives during its death throes. The payload went flying before landing ominously amid a sea of fire. Noticing this, Bota said, "Hell no," and checked out early. He scaled the ladder in an instant, reuniting with Lita at the top. Once there, he shouted at her to get down, warning that the building was about to explode. With no time to explain, he scooped up the confused Lita and braced for the inevitable impact. A thunderous explosion erupted below, engulfing everything in its path. The whole building was blown apart from the inside, dust and debris flying everywhere. Meanwhile, Bota and Lita hadn't escaped unscathed. The shockwave flung them around, their feeble forms bouncing like ragdolls as the structure collapsed. Before long, the entire building came down, crushing the group of sea monsters prowling on the ground floor. As for the kids, they were hurled into the sea, a rain of wreckage and debris accompanying their fall. The duo was dragged deep into the water, all the way to the sea monster's nest. The scene there wasn't much different from the carnage above. The whole place was collapsing, with enormous rubble laying waste to the nest. It quickly became a scene of blood and gore, as countless sea monster eggs met a tragic end. Ignoring all this, Bota grabbed Lita and swam for the surface. He would have loved to rejoice at the monster's fate, but survival held more significance. Still, he let out a relieved sigh when they finally broke the surface. They now had one less thing to worry about. Taking in the ruined surroundings, Bota inexplicably wondered what to do next. The island structure was destroyed, leaving them homeless for the time being. He wanted to curse their luck, but an ominous growl from behind choked the words in his throat. Turning around, he was horrified to find a sea beast glaring at him. And not just one, but a whole group of them. Fangs bared, growls rumbling in deep, guttural tones. More and more emerged from the water until the siblings were completely surrounded. Terrified, they barely had enough time to scream before the monsters lunged. Determined to protect his sister, Bota stepped forward, sword swinging in desperate slashes. He tried his best to fend them off, but their overwhelming numbers were too much. Soon he was swarmed, the sword nearly ripped from his grip. Desperate, Bota yelled for the sea beast to stay back while shielding Lita beside him. No matter what, he would do his best to protect her. When the idea of dying entered his mind, tears welled in his eyes. He wasn't willing. He really didn't want to die, especially not in such a gruesome way. But what could he do? Weakness was a sin after all. Just as his despair reached its peak and all paths seemed blocked, a projectile shot through the air, annihilating a sea monster instantly. Confused, the siblings turned in the direction of the throw, and what they saw greatly surprised them. It was a mommy. And not just any mommy, but a badass one straight out of Kick-Ass Academy. Her eyes were glued to them, her expression one of complete indifference. Seeing this, Bota couldn't help but wonder, who was this auntie with the huge boobies? And why was she going around blessing guys with such glorious, glossy cheeks? Goddamn. The sea monsters, however, weren't too happy about the new arrival. They shifted their fury toward her, fangs bared in silent warning. Then, as if on cue, they all charged, climbing over each other to reach the new prey first. The mysterious lady didn't panic. She reached for her Uzi, cocked that bad boy, and aimed at the lunging foes. Without hesitation, she opened fire, raining a hail of projectiles at the sea monsters. The barrage also struck near the siblings' boat, clipping the sea beast gunning for them. Unfortunately, they too were in danger of being hit, forcing Bota to shield Lita as they endured the barrage. Halfway through cursing the maiden for her reckless attack, Bota finally realized what the projectiles were. Harpoons. The crazy, busty auntie was using a freaking nail gun to wreak havoc. Absurd, yes. But the dying shrieks of the sea monsters told a different tale. This glossy-cheeked maiden meant business. Realizing their direct charge was only leading to slaughter, the sea monsters wised up and dove into the water, continuing their attack from below, using the darkness to mask their movements. Meanwhile, the siblings could only marvel at the sight. Who would have thought the monsters that had caused them so much dread would be mowed down like weeds? Surreal didn't even begin to cover it. Before they could dwell on it, a distinct creak alerted them to an enemy nearby. The duo barely had time to turn before a sea beast lunged, teeth bared. Acting quickly, Bota grabbed Lita and jumped aside, narrowly avoiding the sneak attack. Reaching for his sword, he slashed, drawing blood with the first strike. But the puny damage wasn't enough to deter the beast. It grabbed hold of the sword, trapping Bota before rearing back for a nasty claw strike. Terrified, Bota screamed, his life flashing before his eyes. But just as he was about to be diced into pieces, the lady intervened, peppering the sea monster with hot ones. The attack proved fatal, downing the beast instantly. Shocked, Bota flicked his gaze to the lady, only to find her surrounded by corpses. In that short span of time, she'd annihilated everything around her, and even had the leisure to rescue him. Shifting to offense again, she pressed the attack but soon realized her clip was empty. Unfazed, she ejected the magazine and reached for a new one. But the sea beasts weren't dumb enough to give her that chance. They launched a sneak attack, smacking the gun from her hand. Watching the weapon sink, the lady sighed and glanced at her arm. The damned bastards had managed to land a hit, an act she found completely unacceptable. Seething with rage, she ignored the charging monsters and drew her blades. The lethal weapons unsheathed with a sharp shing, their forms brutal and barbaric. Stomping on the accelerator, the lady surfed across the water, straight at the sea monsters, and straight into my dreams tonight, goddamn. Then, With savagery unbecoming of someone so cheeked up, she swung her blade, decapitating a sea beast in a single slash. Pressing the attack, she parkoured off the next beast while slicing its head clean off. Twisting midair, she spun just in time to meet the next lunging foe. Without hesitation, she performed a cyclone strike, dicing through her prey before distancing herself from the chaos. What followed was a scene of gore. The sea monster split into thirds, its innards painting the ocean crimson. Meanwhile, the maiden didn't even spare it a second glance. She streaked through the water, eyes already locked on her next prey. Without so much as a grunt of displeasure, the mysterious lady got to work. Bust plentiful, twin blades flashing as they diced and slashed through sea monsters. She leaned in, really fucking in, her sword singing as she obliterated the ghastly foes. Taking advantage of a gap in their defense, she surfed out of their encirclement only to circle back and continue her massacre. Her blade danced with exquisite finesse, each swing reaping the life of another sea monster. And of course, she didn't forget to perform for the boys, leaning closer in the panel, giving a full view of that glossy cake. Locking back in, she unleashed a dazzling blade art, slashing through the monsters with ease. Her blades bit into their flesh, staining the ocean with blood and gore. When it was all said and done, the only things left were mangled corpses and the lucky few sea monsters still alive. Or rather, unlucky, because the maiden's attention shifted straight to them. She adjusted her stance and slashed through the first beast with ease, cleaving it in half. Without missing a beat, she decapitated the next with a backhand slash, then plunged her blade deep into the skull of the third. From the sidelines, Bota and Lita could only watch in shock. Who was this mysterious woman, and how could she kill sea monsters as easily as picking cabbages at the market? But this was still a battlefield. They didn't have the luxury of wondering for long. Loud splashes echoed behind them, warning of danger. A wounded sea monster had survived the carnage and now lunged at them, jaws wide to swallow them whole. Just as things looked dire, the maiden intervened. She leapt off her surfboard, soared through the air, and shot toward the beast. Her blade plunged deep into its flesh, and the monster fell, its blood sputtering in crimson and gore. She ignored it as it thrashed, only withdrawing her sword once the body went limp. With that done, she turned back to survey her masterpiece. Mangled corpses floated across the ocean, their blood and entrails painting the waters red. It was a grotesque but strangely beautiful sight, especially with the glossy view of her cheeks in the foreground. Indifferent to the carnage, she casually wiped the blood from her face and sheathed her blades before turning her gaze to the terrified siblings. Bota stepped protectively in front of Lita, glaring at the woman. His mind spun. Was she good or bad? Friend or foe? She'd saved them, yes, but her reckless attacks earlier had nearly gotten them killed. Surely no good person would endanger others so carelessly. So, which was it? Just as he struggled to decide, the woman finally spoke. She told them they were lucky to run into a harpoonist this deep in the open sea, let alone one as visually enticing as her. The word harpoonist made Bota's mind race. He remembered Poppy teaching him the term, warriors who fought sea monsters to protect the people and their homes. That should mean she was good, or at least not out to harm them. Before he could ask more, the woman introduced herself. She was Kana, a harpoonist from Union Busan, and from now on, she would be the #1, specially designated waifu of the story. Bota blinked in confusion. He understood the waifu part. Her bust and cakes more than qualified her. But what the hell was Union Busan? Before Kana could answer, a loud rumble shook the sea. In the direction of the setting sun, a massive silhouette emerged. At first, the siblings thought it was an island, but as their eyes adjusted, they realized it was something far more unbelievable. A colossal ship, stacked with welded structures, cutting through the waves like a floating fortress. This was Union Busan, the very name Kana had spoken. Even as they struggled to take in the sight, the sea churned, and a strange metallic structure surfaced, a submarine. Unlike the siblings, Kana's face twisted in impatience. Had those slow bastards finally caught up? Her annoyance hadn't even settled when the hatch opened and a man in harpoonist gear emerged. He greeted her casually, but her glare made him falter. When she asked why they were so slow, Brune exhaled, exasperated. They weren't slow, she was just too damn fast. They'd barely traveled a mile when she disappeared from view. And besides, was this how she greeted her crew after they'd rushed over to back her up? As he spoke, more of Kana's party emerged from the submarine. Bota was stunned. Until now, it had just been him, Lita, and Poppy. Seeing so many people all at once felt surreal. And the surprises didn't stop there. From the towering ship, more figures appeared. Men, women, and children, all gazing curiously down at the siblings. An overwhelming sensation gripped Bota, and tears welled in his eyes. Looking at the countless faces, warriors, civilians, harpoonists, and of course, Kana the Cheeks Queen herself, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Relief. They weren't alone anymore. Hugging Lita tightly, he thought of his father, telling him they were safe now, that he could finally rest knowing his children were in good hands. Tears streamed as the siblings released the weight they'd carried. Meanwhile, the others simply stared, puzzled by their reaction. But as searchlights swept across the bloodied waves, illuminating the mangled sea monster corpses, the picture became clear. The children had been through hell. Hell they were completely undeserving of. Sympathizing with the duo, the kids were quickly wrapped up and shipped off the battlefield. They watched the preceding events passively, their gazes never leaving the sea monsters and their savior, Kana. Speaking of the Bikini Maiden, she took control of the battlefield, deploying her men to scour the sea for any potential escaped sea monsters. None could be allowed to leave. With their ridiculous reproduction and horniness, it wouldn't be a surprise if the bastards filled the ocean in a year or two. Contacting the deep-sea divers, Kana asked for a report on the matters below the surface. Were there any updates? The liaison replied that things were pretty much leveled down there, with the collapse wiping out all the sea monsters and the eggs. The limited few that managed to escape were diced and slashed apart by her. No corpses remained whole, let alone any survivors. If he were being honest, he would have liked it if she'd spared a single creature for his experiments and study later. Brune scoffed at his whining. He must not know who he was talking to. There was no way Kana of all people could spare any sea monsters. The liaison, codenamed Doctor, agreed. That was indeed the case. With her hatred for sea monsters, it would have been a miracle if she'd left any alive. The sea monsters could only blame their luck for running into Kana instead of literally any other harpoonist in the fleet. Locking back in, his tone became a lot more somber. He stressed that they'd dodged a big bullet this time. If the eggs had been allowed to hatch and worse, spread, the whole ocean would have been in chaos. It was a good thing that Kana intervened in time. Kana, however, wasn't all too enthusiastic about the praise. She informed them that it wasn't her doing. She wasn't the one who collapsed the building and wiped out the sea creatures. Distracted, Brune barely registered her words. He shifted his attention to the sea monster corpse, noting how ugly it was. Then, with a look of disgust, he asked what type it was. He hadn't seen any this ugly before. Before anyone could reply, one of the divers called out to Doctor, urging him to come look at something. When he arrived, he was surprised by the sight before him. A giant, menacing sea monster corpse. One he accurately identified as Kentrasi, one of the 7 sea devils. The beast was humongous, spanning a good 50 meters, and judging by the wounds on its flesh, it had likely been through a tough battle before being brought down by an explosive of some kind. Puzzled, Dr. Foyd asked Kana if that was her doing. Had she not only killed the juvenile sea monster but their mother as well? If so, then that scrumptious, bouncy bust was really deserving of her. Kana stayed silent for a while before answering. First of all, of course she was deserving of all that cake. Hadn't he seen the close-ups the diligent narrator had been sneaking in? And second, she was sorry to burst his bubble, but this wasn't her doing either. She wasn't the one who took it down. Surprised, the doctor's eyes opened wide in shock. If it wasn't her, then who? Kana didn't reply but silently observed the battlefield. That's when she discovered something peculiar. A sword. And one she recognized, judging by her reaction. Flicking her gaze, her attention settled on the 2 kids being shipped away. It wasn't, as she suspected, right? Oblivious to Kana's conjecture, Bota and Lita peacefully went through the registration process. The man in charge of noting down the details asked how long they'd been adrift. Judging by their appearances, it mustn't have been a short time, so about 1 year maybe? Bota replied that it was actually 10 years. He'd been off by 9 years. The dude, feigning shock, gave an exaggerated response before smacking Bota on the head. Did he really expect him to believe that? He must be looking down on low-level public servants to cook up such an obvious lie. Fuming, Lita shoved his hand away. She reiterated what Bota had said, insisting he wasn't lying. Equally enraged, the dude clapped back, telling the kids not to mess with him. Did they even know who he was? Lita answered briskly. He was, as he'd said, a low-level public servant. This enraged the man even more, and he cursed his big mouth for saying that. He wanted to bring the smoke for real, but Bota's next words silenced him. With a sad tone, he explained that they hadn't been alone. They'd had their father with them, but obviously not anymore. The Leviathan killed him. Sympathizing, the man reined in his earlier smoke. His voice turned gentle as he continued the registration process. When all was said and done, he introduced himself properly. He was Kehoe Lee, the head of the refugee department, and from then on, he would be watching. Sorry. He meant to say he would be in their care. Though he tried to hide it, Lita caught his slip-up and gave him a teasing face. Bota, however, wasn't concerned about that and inquired about what he truly cared about. Who were those flashy-looking people over there, including the foxy bikini-wearing maiden with them? Kehoe replied that they were harpoonists. Upon receiving the answer, Bota's eyes widened in shock. So those were the legendary harpoonists, noble warriors tasked with protecting the people from sea monsters? But why were they so peculiar? Especially the half-naked baddie with them. Not that he was complaining, because a little bit of cake wouldn't hurt anyone. He was just amazed. Thinking back to his father, he finally confirmed that his words were actually true, and not mere fairy tales. Noticing Bota's fervent stare, especially around Kana's, let's say, peculiarities, Kehoe explained that she was different from the rest, a true 3-star harpoonist. He then explained the ranking system of the harpoonists. Those part of the troop always marked their kills on their bodies. It is through this tradition that the ranking system for harpoonists was established. For every 100 sea monsters killed, a harpoonist cements that achievement by tattooing a star on their body, meaning Kana, as a 3-star harpoonist, has killed at least 300 sea monsters, a feat that is truly awe-inspiring, considering many die without achieving even 1-star rank. Amazed, Bota asked his next question. Following that logic, wouldn't it mean that a 6-star harpoonist had killed at least 600 sea monsters? Kehoe laughed at the thought. 6 stars? Did he think stars were that easy to acquire? The highest known ranker in Union Busan was 4 stars. If there was ever someone with 6 stars, then that person would have been a legend by now. Shocked, Bota's face changed drastically. He could have sworn the stars on Poppy were 6. So what the hell was going on? It was either Poppy was a swindler, or the dude was a low-key powerhouse and had hidden that fact from them. Either way, now wasn't the time to think about it. He turned his attention to the approaching harpoonists. Leading the charge, Kana called out to Kehoe. She informed him that their boarding permission had been granted, so they should head to the main ship. Then, without bothering with his reply, she shifted her gaze to the siblings. Her gaze lingered on them for a while before she turned her head and surfed away. As she did, we were shown a great view of them cheeks, and, of course, the more plot-sensitive blade she'd picked up from the battlefield. Seeing his father's blade, Bota tried calling out, but the trio ignored him and surfed away. He could only watch helplessly as Kana took the blade away. Meanwhile, Brune confronted Kana about her actions. Why did she pick up the sword? And did she really think the owner of that blade had killed Kentrasi? Kana replied that beings on the level of the 7 sea devils couldn't be killed by just one man. She expounded on this by referring to a previous incident where an entire fleet was almost massacred just to fend off another sea devil. Such beings were truly beyond comprehension. Chiming in, the spacesuit-looking harpoonist revealed that he knew what she was talking about. It must be the Ultra Crab Scutum massacre. Apparently, 15 years ago, a refugee fleet was attacked by a crustacean-type Leviathan, Scutum. Because of its hard shell, the people and harpoonists were completely helpless against it, and all their weapons failed. As a result, the entire fleet was massacred. Solemn, Brune chimed in, saying that he'd heard the sea beast was only killed after all the harpoonists in Union Busan were deployed. Kana, however, told him that was a lie. Scutum was never killed by the harpoonists of Union Busan. The devil surfaced, devoured all it could eat, and retreated back into the depths when it had had its fill. It was never killed by a harpoonist of Union Busan. Amused, Brune chuckled mockingly. Could it be that Kana was also like the surviving refugees, believing in some fairy tale about a savior who swooped in to save the day? Kana didn't bother with his teasing tone. She made it clear that it wasn't a fairy tale, and she knew this because she'd been there that day. Thinking back to it, she vividly remembered the sight of her mother being swallowed and devoured by Scutum. The sound of her fading screams and cracking bones was something she could never forget. She'd watched it all, from the devouring to the sputtering blood and gore, and to this day, it was a horror she wouldn't wish on anyone, not even her worst enemy. A faint killing intent emanated from her as she recalled those days, back when she was weak and powerless, and the truth of the New World Order became apparent to her. To sea monsters, especially ones on the level of sea devils, humans were nothing but food, an easy and convenient snack whenever they felt like it. Her voice gradually lowered, replaced by a deep, hateful growl. Seeing this, Brune and Spacesuit Dude came to a realization. This was why Kana hated sea monsters so much, why she'd be the first in the fray should any of the beasts arise. And honestly, he didn't blame her. Plus, the sight of her jiggly, fine-ass battling sea monsters wasn't too bad on the eyes either. Ignoring Brune's horny ass, we shift scenes to the kids. After receiving permission to board, they were transported to the entrance of the giant ship. Of course, being new to the whole site, they couldn't help but gawk in wonder, finding the entire experience surreal. Never had they imagined witnessing such a grand scene in their lives, yet here they were. They dazedly boarded the vessel, not forgetting to reclaim their lost possessions. Under the guidance of Kiho, the trio made their way deeper into Union Busan, as the overworked civil servant explained this would be their new home. The board had agreed to let them live there, but only on the condition that they behaved. If they broke any rules or crashed out during the probation period, they'd be tossed into the sea. No questions asked. Despite his unsettling words, the kids ignored him and celebrated instead. Their minds only registered the good news and blocked everything else out. As for all that bullshit about the board and getting kicked out, why should they care? So long as they had a safe roof over their heads, even for a second, they'd say the experience was worth it. Taken aback, Kiho looked at them strangely. Could it be these kids were slow? How else could he explain their weird behavior? Nevertheless, they were his responsibility now, so he had to look after them, even if they were a bit restarted. With that in mind, he glanced at their bare feet. They'd certainly need shoes. Walking barefoot on the ship wasn't safe. Checking the time, he realized it was past his work hours, but he couldn't ignore the shoe situation, not with how dangerous the boat might be. Reluctantly, he decided to escort the kids to the market. Hearing a new term, the kids asked what a market was. Was it a kind of food or some shit? Kiho replied that it wasn't, and as for what exactly it was, they'd just have to wait and see. The kids nodded obediently and followed along. As they moved deeper into the vessel, their astonishment grew. They witnessed machines and operations they never thought they'd see in their lives. The whole experience was surreal, and they soaked it all up. Ignoring Lita's joy about the stable vessel, Bota flicked his gaze to the nearby machines. Though grander and more sophisticated, he recognized the process: scavenging, the same work he and Poppy had done countless times. He couldn't help but wonder. So even the mighty Union Busan, just like their humble fishing boat, hadn't completely severed ties with the old world, still relying on its relics to survive. But even so, it was a good thing. If things worked out, having a familiar field to work in would make adjustment easier. Moving on from the scavenging, Bota noticed something else: machine constructs resembling deep-sea divers. Though he didn't know what they were, his inner child was fascinated, his gaze glued to them. Only when Kiho announced their arrival at the market did he suppress his urge to run off and play. Locking in, the sight before him left him mesmerized. So many people, so much commotion, flashing lights and wares. It might as well have been a fantasy scene. The whole place was bustling. And I don't know if it's just me, but these two maidens kinda seemed like they were selling cheeks on the low. Or maybe I'm just tripping. Either way, the kids quickly lost themselves in the festivities. They gawked at everything, from the old man playing a strange instrument to the delicious food being grilled. It wasn't until Kehoe told them to hurry up that they snapped out of their reverie. Squeezing through the crowd, they arrived at their intended destination, a shoe store. The owner, a skinny-looking man, welcomed them enthusiastically, stating the current price, 15 units a pair. For the two siblings, that'd be 30 units total. Frowning, Kehoe asked why it was so expensive. For that price, he might as well visit the merchant's wife at the massage parlor and get a happy ending. Why the hell would he care about shoes when he could float his way to ecstasy instead? Suppressing the heartache, the merchant told him to take it or leave it. He wouldn't lower the price, so Kehoe might as well save the trouble of haggling. As for his wife, he'd best keep her name out of his mouth. He supported her business, even though she gave the sucky on the low. Amazed, Kehoe ignored the green hat and turned to Bota. If he had something to trade, he should try it. Bota nodded, rummaged through his stuff, and fished out a clock. The merchant, unimpressed, simply pointed to his vast collection of clocks. Did it look like he needed more? Stumped, Bota pulled out items one by one, searching for something of value. Finally, when he took out a bottle of whiskey, the merchant's face changed. Trying to play it cool, the slimy bastard agreed to the trade. He'd exchange the whiskey for 2 pairs of shoes, if Bota quickly handed over the bottle. Oblivious, the kid hurried to complete the trade, but was stopped by Kehoe. The merchant wanted to swap whiskey for 2 measly pairs of shoes? How shameless could he be? In fact, after this, Kehoe would definitely pay his wife's parlor a visit. But first, he wouldn't stand idly by and let the kids get scammed. Raising his voice, he shouted to the crowd, "There's a bottle of whiskey there for sale." The crowd immediately got heated. The bids poured in, soon surpassing a whopping 1,500 units. After an intense auction and emotional roller coaster, the kids left the market fully stocked. They bought everything they needed, and a few extras. Why not? They were bawling now. On the walk back, Lita sighed in disappointment. If they'd known whiskey was so valuable, they wouldn't have dumped their stash in the ocean, only keeping the bottles. Who knows? Maybe they could have even checked out that massage parlor Kehoe kept rambling about. Stumbling, Kehoe told her to stop speaking nonsense. That divine parlor wasn't for kids. But she should consider this a lesson. The value of things changes depending on the situation. When they emptied their stash in the ocean, maybe it was to free containers for water. In that situation, water was clearly more valuable than whiskey, so she shouldn't beat herself up. But one thing was clear. Around here, the only thing that mattered was money. If they needed something to rely on, the only answer was paper, aka the mullah. The kids nodded seriously, taking Sensei Kehoe's words to heart. Smirking in satisfaction, he pointed to a room. That would be their new home. The kids wasted no time, pushing open the door, eager to see their new place. And, well, we can describe it in one word: trash. The room looked like a dumpster, with piles of junk in the corners. Dust everywhere, spiders and rodents scurrying about. But despite the miserable conditions, the kids were beyond delighted. They screamed with joy, bouncing happily on the bed. This was their new home, and they loved every dusty inch of it. After celebrating, they finally settled down and peered out the window. For the first time in their lives, they witnessed the grandeur of the night sky. Their reaction was expected. Lita nearly passed out while Bota zoned out, staring at the stars. The very same stars he'd heard so much about from Poppy. To think he'd actually get to see them? Tears welled in his eyes. Just as Poppy had said, they were incredibly beautiful. Meanwhile, as Bota was lost in his feels, a significant event unfolded outside Union Busan. Several cranes worked hard to pull something massive from the water. And no, it wasn't your ex, but the sea devil Kentrasi. After considerable effort, the giant behemoth was finally hauled up, and damn, was it ugly. Its sheer size made everyone feel insignificant, realizing why sea devils only regarded humans as prey. The gap was just too massive. But among the crowd of unsettled onlookers, one person felt something else: joy, and maybe even a trace of horniness. His face flushed, sweating with ecstasy. As he gazed at the creature he now considered the pinnacle of transcendence, a sea devil. He quivered at the thought of cutting it open, studying it, exploring every nook and cranny of its magnificent body. The idea alone made him pant with anticipation. Brune, however, didn't care about the doctor's freaky crush-out. The only thing on his mind was whether he could face such a behemoth and live to tell the tale. The doctor told him to stop dreaming. The only outcome would be his untimely death. Hell, he doubted even the busty Miss Kana could pull it off. Speaking of that smoke show, where was she? Why was she missing out on this? Brune replied that he didn't know. Whatever it was, it must have been important for her to pass up such a rare sight. Switching scenes, we're taken to an inconspicuous spot within Union Busan. In an otherwise empty hallway, a delicate, jiggly, bouncy pair of cheeks slowly made their way forward. After some light thirst trapping, the maiden Kana finally reached her destination, a workshop. Greeting the blacksmith, Sting, Kana asked how the analysis had gone. Was it as she suspected? Was the sword the real deal? Sting replied that it was. He'd spent countless hours fixing and maintaining that sword, and he could tell at a glance. This was indeed the Sword of Massacre. But where had she acquired such a legendary relic? Kana didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up the sword, touching it fondly as she voiced the thought on both their minds. If this really was the Sword of Massacre, then it must belong to that man. The legendary Leviathan Slayer, 6-star harpooner, and living legend, Tian freaking Ma. Gulping loudly, Sting asked what she planned to do. Surely she knew the coming events would be troublesome. Kana nodded. She was aware. There was bound to be a bloodbath, but it wouldn't change what she had to do. The kids had to be taken away from there. Meanwhile, back in their room, Bota calmly watched over the sleeping Lita. People had told him not to worry, that powerful harpooners were stationed to protect them. But despite all the reassurances, he couldn't fall asleep. A foreboding feeling lingered in his heart, refusing to go away. Something big was coming, and it was coming for them. Fast forward to a couple of hours later, in Kana's room. The maiden, much like Bota, was troubled and couldn't fall asleep. She sat by the window, cheeks poked out, completely lost in thought. Her mind kept replaying the events of the day and the conversation with Sting. From the features of the corpse fished from the sea, it was almost certain it was the former sea devil, Kentrasi. Judging by the battle scars on its body, it was clear it had gone through a gruesome fight before its eventual death. So, was it him? Was the owner of the sword, Tian Ma, the one responsible for fighting Kentrasi to the death? But why would he do that? To protect someone? The kids? It certainly made sense if you thought about it that way. Humans tend to fight for their loved ones after all. It was reasonable that Tian Ma had faced off against such a dreadful foe for the sake of his family. But where was he now? What was his fate after that battle with the Leviathan? Probably dead, sacrificing himself to bring the behemoth down with him. A sad sigh escaped her lips as her thoughts reached that point. Rubbing the snow globe, one that clearly meant a lot to her, her mind drifted to the concepts of family and sacrifice. She too had a family, one among the many refugees that lived by drifting on the sea. They made their living by combing through the seabed for scraps and selling anything of value to anyone willing to buy it, which in most cases was Union Busan. She clearly remembered being young and haughty, looking down on the scraps scavenged by her parents. Such trash. What value could they possibly have? In those moments, when her worldly naivety threatened to rear its ugly head, her father would gently correct her, teaching her not to underestimate anything. He told her not to look at it as collecting trash, but rather as hunting for treasure. Then, as if to prove his point, a seemingly ordinary piece of junk turned out to be a beautiful snow globe, which he gave to Kana. Mesmerized, Kana stared at the globe, taken aback by how beautiful it looked. She couldn't help but recall the stories she'd heard about the world before the fall. How everyone used to live in beautiful houses. How enviable their lives were. Sulking, she suppressed her emotions and returned the snow globe to her father, telling him to sell it instead. She didn't need it. If he sold it to Union Busan, it should fetch them a pretty sum, a far better investment than giving it to her as a gift. Her parents, however, hugged her and gave the snow globe back. So what if they could get a better price by selling it? In their eyes, she was the most important thing. Gifting it to her was more than worth it. Their words comforted Kana, and she grew to love the snow globe even more. Several days passed, and the refugees continued their odious struggle to survive. As usual, they scavenged for scraps and sold them to Union Busan in exchange for food, water, and other essentials. To the refugees, and especially the young but still thirst-trapping Kana, goddamn, the massive Union Busan was an object of admiration. Not only could the citizens there live without fear of sea monsters, but they also didn't have to worry about being swept away by raging waves. To the struggling refugees, their lives seemed perfect, sparking endless envy and longing. It became the goal of every refugee to acquire citizenship and live aboard the Busan. However, accomplishing that feat was easier said than done. The life of refugees was fraught with constant danger, barely giving them enough breathing room to work toward that dream. Not only did they have to watch out for accidents while scavenging, but they also had to endure attacks from sea monsters, their numbers dwindling over time. People they loved, dreamed, and lived with died constantly, proving just how cruel refugee life was. Sometimes, she wondered, why did they have to live like that? Why didn't Union Busan just outright reject their appeals for citizenship instead of hiding it behind the false promise of granting it if they found a treasure? Why keep giving them hope when it was only going to be crushed in the end? So cruel. Find a treasure and get citizenship? What a load of bullshit. It was nothing but a pipe dream engineered by Union Busan to keep them toiling beneath them. There was no such thing as a grand treasure in that cursed sea. However, contrary to Kana's pessimistic belief, there were treasures in the sea, and her group stumbled upon one at long last. In essence, the treasure was nothing like what Kana had expected. It wasn't a chest of gold or anything like that, but relics from the past, specifically, deep-sea diver suits manufactured in preparation for the eventual apocalypse. That's why Union Busan paid so much attention to them and designated them as treasures. Having finally achieved their long-desired dream, the refugee family celebrated, anticipating their entry into Union Busan. From then on, they wouldn't have to live in fear anymore. They would finally be citizens. Unfortunately, just as things were looking up, disaster struck. On the very day of the celebratory banquet marking their entry into Union Busan, the sea devil Scudam attacked. Several lives were lost, all dying gruesomely in its jaws. Even Kana, an unlucky survivor, lost an eye, her face forever scarred by the event. But the worst scar was the emotional trauma of watching her mother get eaten alive, her cries forever lingering in Kana's mind. Amidst the death, gore, and bloodshed, several refugees tried to fight back, but their attempts were futile. They couldn't even scratch the surface of Scudam's carapace, let alone endure a single retaliatory blow. Like a drove of pigs, they were all slaughtered, crushed mercilessly beneath Scudam's giant pincers. And as if that wasn't torture enough, the few who managed to survive were tossed into its mouth, finished off by its ghastly fangs. The night of celebration quickly turned into a night of slaughter, with no one in the refugee family destined to survive. The boats that had escaped earlier tried to double back to help, but they quickly became Scudam's new targets. Using a technique that could only be described as horrifying, it shot out giant spikes from its carapace, riddling the boats and their occupants with holes. Just like that, the backup was wiped out, plunging the remaining survivors into deeper despair. Meanwhile, Kana's father, who had miraculously survived the tragedy, tracked her down and dragged her to the deck. He tried radioing for support, yelling, "Mayday!" to Union Busan, but all that came through was static. They'd been abandoned. No one was coming to save them. Horrified, they could only watch helplessly as Scudam tore apart their ship, hunting for survivors and killing them instantly. Before long, it would be their turn to face the devil, and their deaths promised to be anything but peaceful. As despair thickened and Scudam's roars reverberated across the sea, the noise eventually reached a mysterious figure quietly fishing in the distance. He paused, glanced up, and gazed toward the chaos. Who else could he be but a younger version of Poppy, or in other words, Taeon freaking Ma? The man, the myth, the legend peered deep into the misty sea, taking note of an approaching boat. At first, he thought it was just a regular sea vessel, but upon closer inspection, he realized something was gravely wrong. The boat was riddled with ghastly spikes, almost as if it had received a full session of backshots from a porcupine. The kind where it wasn't gentle either, because the boat seemed haggard, truly worse for wear. Not to mention the mutilated corpses on board. If he factored in all those details, it was clear something had gone horribly wrong on the ocean's surface. Realizing this, Tianma glanced in the direction of the earlier commotion. He'd initially thought it was the sound of sea monsters getting their freak on, probably clapping some fishy cheeks, but now he knew it was something else entirely. Something grave. With that in mind, he grabbed his gear and set off. Meanwhile, back on the refugee ship, Scudam continued its unbridled rampage. It tore through the ship's hull like paper, snipping and pinching its way into the interior. Seeing this, the refugees' radio calls for help became even more frantic. They shouted, begging for Union Busan to please reply. Finally, after enduring tension that nearly drove them insane, the connection to Union Busan was established. A lazy voice sounded, asking what they wanted. Didn't they know what time it was? He was about to procure some cheeks, goddammit. Ignoring him, another refugee snatched the radio, yelling that they didn't care about that. They were under attack and needed help right freaking now. The voice, however, responded with a cold and firm no. They were not responsible for the protection of the refugees. If they had a Leviathan attacking them, then they had to figure something out themselves. The cold reply shocked Kana's father, who snatched back the radio and yelled desperately into the damned thing. He told the voice they had a child on board, so even if they abandoned them, they should at least save her. He was begging them. Unfortunately, his pleas fell on deaf ears. The answer from the other side was still as cold as ever. His request had been denied. Union Busan wouldn't get involved in this matter. Shocked, Kana stared into the void, dazed. Denied? Was this still the same Union Busan she knew? How could a place revered as a paradise for refugees be so cruel? Opposite her, her father wasn't willing to take no for an answer. He screamed into the radio, begging Busan to please help them. He even mentioned the unarchived relics, promising to hand them over if Union Busan sent help. Regrettably, all he got in return was a cold, "good luck," followed by the line disconnecting. Just as he was about to radio again, plead more for Kana's sake, the hull suddenly burst open, revealing a menacing pincer creeping in. It burst through, rummaged across the deck before grabbing hold of Poppy and dragging him away. Alarmed, Kana called out in shock, shouting and running after her father. He, however, shouted for her to get back, instructing her to hide and survive. Before the two could even say their goodbyes, the sea beast tossed him into its mouth, ending him with a single crunch. His blood sputtered out like a fountain, drenching the unfortunate Kana, who'd been unlucky enough to watch all of it happen. Her face grew visibly pale, showing just how much the disaster had affected her. It had only been a couple of hours since they'd discovered the relics, hopeful that their lives would change for the better. And now? Merely a couple of hours later, everyone was dead, either killed or eaten by the sea beast, including her very own parents. Despair and shock seeped into her, preventing her from reacting even when Scudam was attacking. It was as if she were a living husk, unbothered that a giant pincer was whipping down to crush her. All she did was flash a sneak peek of the pantsu, giving the homies a little treat before her inevitable demise. But just as it seemed over for her, a figure streaked by, whisking her into his arms. He moved so fast that no one noticed him, not even the Sea Devil, who missed its target and crashed futilely into the hull. When the dust settled, the rescuer was clear for all to see. It was none other than Tianma. Wearing a sincere yet stern look, he told Kana to cherish her life more. She shouldn't be so eager to give it up. Then, with the confidence of a veteran, he handed her over to another refugee, asking him to look after her. The refugee snapped out of his daze and grabbed Kana, but then asked, who was he? And what was he doing there? Tian replied that he was a harpooner from Union Busan. As for what he was doing there, wasn't it obvious? He was there to clap some Leviathan cheeks, of course. Saying so, he let the hilt of his blade show, revealing exactly who he was. The legendary Leviathan Slayer, Maiden Whisperer, Divorce Facilitator, and, on special occasions, MILF Harvester. He was the one and only Tianma. Taken aback by the grandiose introduction, Kana stared at him curiously. A harpooner from Union Busan? Had those bastards finally sent help? The other refugee chimed in, looking left and right. Getting a harpooner's help was great and all, but where were the others? Solemn-faced, Tian replied that there were no others. He was there on his own. But that wasn't their concern. What they needed to do was grab Kana, board an escape boat, and get the hell out of there. He would stay behind to draw the Leviathan's attention. Then, not bothering with the refugee's shocked and pale face, he turned to confront the behemoth. The first thing he noticed was its thick carapace, making him doubt whether his sword would penetrate it. Regardless, he couldn't turn back now. He'd just have to swing and see what happened. Speaking of swing, Scudam swang at him, initiating their bout. Tian read the attack, ducked below it, and countered with a wide slash. But his target wasn't Scudam, it was the escape boat to the side. He released it onto the water, opening up an escape route for Kana and the refugee. With that done, he shifted his attention back to Scudam, his great foe. Facing off against the beast, Tian took the liberty to attack first this time. He dug his feet into the ground, lunging forward with ridiculous speed. When he was close enough, he performed a cyclone slash, landing a flurry of attacks on its shell. But just as he'd predicted, the attacks weren't powerful enough to breach its defense. Distancing himself, he retreated far enough to act on his next plan: overwhelm with power. Since the shell was too hard to breach with normal attacks, he'd just have to increase the output. With that in mind, he toggled a switch on his blade, releasing a hiss of pressurized gas. Staring down Scudam, he told it to come at him. Things would surely be different this time. Scudam didn't hesitate and swung at him, whipping its giant pincer forward. Tian swung back, clashing head-on against the sea beast. The force from their clash kicked up waves, sending shockwaves across the boat. And surprisingly, Tian came out on top, chipping a bit of Scudam's shell. Realizing this, the Leviathan panicked and jumped back, putting distance between them, surprising everyone watching, especially Kana. She'd never thought it was possible for such a mighty beast to back down, yet here they were. Tian, on the other hand, faced the move with calm focus, not daring to lower his guard in the slightest. Who knew what underhanded moves this creature was capable of when cornered? Glancing around, he noticed the mutilated corpses, and his face darkened significantly. To think this lowly creature had the nerve to fear death after slaughtering humans like dogs. How could he possibly allow that? He grit his teeth, vowing to kill this monster even if it was the last thing he did. Burning with resolve, he charged forward, unleashing a flurry of slashes at Scudam. Each attack landed with a sickening punch, forcing Scudam onto the defensive. Tian noticed this and advanced, landing blow after blow on the hateful creature. He kept at it until the Leviathan was pushed far back, shocking Kana and the refugee, who were watching from the sidelines. Never in their wildest dreams would they have thought a human could push a Leviathan, a sea devil, to this extent. It was almost as if the roles were reversed. Tian was the predator, and Scudam was the prey, pitifully suffering a beating and powerless to stop its inevitable demise. Kana couldn't believe it, and the only thing on her mind was, "Ay, Dios mío, papi, vámonos on these cheeks." For those who don't understand, don't worry, I don't get it either. I'm just speaking nonsense as usual. Anyway, back to the story. After hacking at Scudam for what seemed like ages, Tian finally made enough progress to wear down its shell. Bits and pieces constantly fell off, showing that the great Leviathan was at its wit's end. Realizing this, Tian immediately pressed the attack, his sword flashing with brilliant majesty. He unleashed a flurry of strikes, finally breaching Scudam's defenses and drawing blood. After the first sputter came the second, then the third, and soon Scudam was leaking like a faucet, drenching the boat with its blood. Witnessing this, Kana couldn't believe her eyes. The hunter that had constantly oppressed the prey was now at its wit's end, barely clinging to life. Was this the norm among harpooners? Or was this man, Tian freaking Ma, the oddity? She didn't know, but one thing was certain. Her little heart was beating like crazy. And a part of her, albeit a tiny part, started entertaining the idea of making it out of there alive. Maybe with Tian's help, they might just make it out of that shit show unscathed. Speaking of Tian, the Poppy was going ham on Scudam. He diced the bastard up like he was making sushi or some shit. With one final slash, he distanced himself, having completely obliterated one of Scudam's pincers. As expected, the sea devil didn't like that at all. It screeched like a little bitch, even foaming at the mouth. The relentless barrage had done a number on it, and even its monstrous vitality couldn't save it from the torment it faced. Tian, on the other hand, was still relatively intact, with the only point of concern being his dwindling ammunition. He'd used up nearly all his gas canisters, making the current loadout the last one he had. If he couldn't defeat Scudam with that final canister, he'd lose the power to pierce through its thick shell, and by extension, lose the ability to win that fight. If things came to that point, he might as well abandon ship and run for his life. Of course, he'd bring the beautiful Kana with him, because who in their right mind would abandon a waifu? Anyway, he locked back in just in time to read Scudam's next attack and dodge gracefully. However, after doing so a couple more times, he soon realized Scudam's actions weren't as simple as they seemed. At first, it looked like it was attacking him, but upon closer inspection, it was obvious its target wasn't him at all, but the boat. The little bastard had realized it was losing that fight and had decided to sink the ship, probably hoping to rely on the underwater terrain advantage to clutch a win. This became increasingly apparent when it stopped masking its actions, reached into the boat, ripped out its engine, and used it to bash large holes into the sea vessel, making it clear it was determined to sink that bitch no matter what. Just when Tian thought he'd figured out Scudam's ploy, the Leviathan hit him with a curveball. Instead of continuing its unbridled destruction, it turned its sights on the refugees, hurling a freaking engine at them. The change was so unexpected that the trio couldn't even react before the engine came crashing down on Kana and the dude. Debris flew everywhere, and mournful cries followed, showcasing just how much harm and destruction the attack had caused. Tian's blood boiled with rage and resentment. He couldn't believe that even while fighting him, Scudam would disregard him and attack the duo instead. Wasn't it looking down on him a bit too much? His rage intensified, compelling him to launch an all-out assault on Scudam. Meanwhile, at the crash site, things weren't looking too good for the duo. The man had luckily survived the attack, but the same couldn't be said for Kana. She'd found herself trapped beneath a pile of rubble, immobilized and unable to free herself. Fortunately, the man seemed relatively fine, so Kana called out to him for help. But what happened next left Kana shocked and me appalled. The man, no, it's more accurate to call him a waste of space, literally turned and ran away, mumbling something about not wanting to die. Seriously, who would abandon a child to save himself? Just how cowardly could one person be? Kana watched his retreating back, despair and hopelessness sinking in. Back on the battlefield, Tian continued his relentless barrage, unaware of the predicament Kana was facing. He hacked and slashed at Scudam, chipping away at its armor bit by bit. Everything seemed to be going great, until Scudam pulled another curveball. It stopped attacking and focused all its efforts on defending, literally becoming a turtled-up tank. This surprised Tian, forcing him to pause his attacks. He gazed quizzically at Scudam, wondering what it was up to. What was the point of turtling up now? It wasn't as if he couldn't wear it down to death if it just lay there. But upon careful observation, he noticed something that made his heart race. Scudam's spikes were looking particularly menacing at that moment. And was it just him? Or were most of those spikes aimed suspiciously at him? Just as he was on the brink of realization, a loud voice rang out, interrupting his thoughts. The voice was obviously from the coward, coinciding with the moment he abandoned Kana, howling cheeks to save his own life. Initially curious, all ideas to investigate were quickly tossed out the window when Tian noticed the changes on Scudam's body. The spikes had become even more menacing, heralding the onset of an impending attack. Without hesitation, he shouted for the man to get down, all while bracing for impact himself. What followed was a hail of spikes, blitzing the absolute shit out of everyone and everything around. Even Tian wasn't spared. 2 spikes pinned him by the arm and leg to a wall. Luckily, the fatal attacks missed. Otherwise, things would have truly ended tragically for the young hero. As for the coward, the bastard got the death he deserved, impaled by multiple spikes. He even caught one in the cheeks, making this one of the worst deaths in the history of the channel. I honestly wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even my worst enemy. Back to Tian Ma. He watched the man's death with a hint of regret, but quickly focused on his own situation. Things were already bad enough. He didn't have the luxury of worrying about others. Thus, he assessed his situation, and as expected, things were grim. Not only was his arm pinned, but it was his dominant hand, the one he relied on to fight. In addition, he couldn't reach his sword even if he wanted to, so fighting back was impossible. Realizing it was beyond his control, he decided to shift his efforts to what little he could do. He reached for the spike on his thigh and painfully pulled it out. With that move, he bought himself just enough wiggle room, just in case shit popped off again. And true to Murphy's Law, the horrible things that could happen, did happen. Scutum closed in to finish its attack. Without so much as a hello, it lunged forward, pincer aimed for Tion's neck, obviously ready to choke the shit out of him. Tion saw this and leaped up, barely avoiding the decapitating strike. Then, with a single graceful move, he twisted his body, swinging in with an attack of his own. He stabbed the spike into Scutum's pincer, dealing some damage, but mostly setting things up for his next move, freeing himself. With a tug from the retreating Leviathan, Tion generated enough force to pull himself free from the spike. Then, as if he were a flood dragon released into the sea, he shot at Scutum with unmatched ferocity, unleashing a terrifying cyclone of death. What followed was a devastating strike, kicking up shockwaves and pinning Scutum to the ground. The poor sea beast hadn't even caught its breath when another flurry struck, hacking deep into its flesh. Overwhelmed and honestly losing too much blood for its liking, Scutum struck back in a counterattack. The move was so swift that Tion only noticed it when it hit, sending him flying like a rag doll. He crashed pitifully, coughing up a large mouthful of blood. Nevertheless, his fighting spirit wasn't diminished in the slightest. He shakily rose to his feet, pushing his aching body to its limits. Grabbing hold of his sword, he faced Scutum, which, at that point, was also struggling to rise. But judging by the dense wounds on its body and the frothing at the mouth, the sea devil was in an even worse state than he was. This delighted Tion, and he couldn't help but grin at the Leviathan's plight. To think a mighty sea devil could be reduced to such a state. If he wasn't half dead himself, he would have definitely flamed its ass right there. However, he needed to figure out how he was going to handle the situation. Just as he was racking his brain for a solution, the first rays of dawn broke through, drawing both their attention. For Tion, it was just a little sunlight. But for Scutum, the consequences were far more dire. As soon as the sunshine hit its body, it started melting, producing an eerie, sizzling sound. Without hesitation, it covered its burning eyes, backing away with impressive speed. Soon, to Tion's shock, it leapt off the boat, diving back into the sea. And just like that, the devil retreated, scared off by mere sunlight after leaving a mountain of corpses in its wake. Isn't that a bitch? A bitch indeed. Surprised, Tian Ma watched it go in a daze. Was it really escaping? Just like that? After all it had done? He wanted to pursue, but unfortunately his body couldn't suppress the pain anymore and collapsed. It was only after the adrenaline rush ended that he realized just how much damage he'd taken. His whole body was a mess. Nevertheless, it still wasn't time for him to relax just yet. He quickly gathered himself and headed to check on the absent Kana. After searching through the carnage, he finally found her trapped beneath debris. Without hesitation, he proceeded to give her a helping hand, working to free her from her cramped space. And I know he's only trying to help, but damn, did he have to do it in that position? Shoving his junk in her face like that feels way too diabolical in my opinion. But I digress. Anyway, ignoring the questionable rescue position and the pink-eyed Kana is sure to get after this Weinerfest, we switch to the duo chopping it up on the ship's hull. Curious and a little resentful, Kana asked Tian Ma if he'd killed Scutum. Tian replied that he hadn't. The little bastard had escaped the first chance it got when it realized things weren't going its way. Plus, it had had its fill of humans, so staying and endangering itself further probably wouldn't have made sense. Sighing bitterly, Kana asked if it would be back. Was there a possibility of that vermin rearing its ugly head again? Tian replied that he didn't know. Leviathans were unpredictable creatures. However, if it did show up, they'd handle it then. For now, they should be grateful to be alive and enjoy the beautiful sunrise. Kana replied that she couldn't. With all her loved ones lost, brutally at that, she doubted she could ever enjoy the sunrise again. Her mom and dad had been eaten alive. How could she possibly recover from that? She knelt down crying, letting the weight of the situation sink in. Unable to comfort her, Tian just stood by her side. He occasionally patted her delicate head, knowing that was all he could do for the heartbroken girl. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the personnel of Union Busan arrived, bringing life to the otherwise destitute battlefield. What was unfortunate, however, was that the people of Union Busan hadn't come to help, but to capitalize on the aftermath of the battle. They had no intention of helping the survivors, and instead headed straight for the relics discovered by the refugees. With zero shame or guilt, they whisked them away, loading them onto the Busan as their spoils of war. As for Kana, they did her dirty with some bullshit politics. In exchange for selling the relics to them, the government of Union Busan offered her citizenship status. It was just a formality, since the relics were already in their hands, and there was no way they'd give them up. Offering Kana citizenship was simply a way to cover loose ends. As for the refugees who'd lost their lives during the incident, they neither asked nor cared about them in the slightest. Fuming yet helpless to change the situation, Kana had no choice but to sign the paperwork, selling off the relics and watching the snakes in the government congratulate her for her deeds. It was almost like she was being cheered and celebrated for selling off her deceased parents, a truly uncomfortable feeling indeed. What followed afterwards was even more heartbreaking for the pitiful maiden. She watched as the government of Union Busan fabricated stories of their heroism, claiming to have slain Scudam. They paraded its claw throughout the ship, using it as proof of their conquest. As for the true hero or the refugees who'd lost their lives to the beast, no one talked about them, as if they'd never existed, never truly mattered. Heartbroken, Kana slipped away from the bustling streets, hoping to clear her mind in the solitude of the back alleys. Unfortunately, Lady Luck had no intention of smiling on her that day. Just as she was distancing herself from the crowd, she accidentally eavesdropped on a conversation by the harpooners of Union Busan. The bastards were talking shit about the refugees, calling them pathetic for risking their lives to work for citizenship on the Busan. And as if that wasn't bad enough, one of them bragged about a distress signal he'd received from the refugee ship the previous day, a signal he'd ruthlessly rejected with a single word: denied. Laughing maniacally, he regretted not being there to see the look on the refugees' faces when he shuttered their hope. Had they despaired? Cried? He didn't know, but damn, it sure was a bummer he hadn't been there to see it. Chuckling, he received his companion's praises with glee. According to him, he'd saved the Busan a considerable amount of money, enabling them to acquire relics for free. If that wasn't a meritorious deed, then he didn't know what was. Kana, who had been listening from the side, couldn't take it anymore and lashed out. She grabbed an empty bottle from the ground, smashed it, and wielded it against the bastard harpooners. With cold rage in her eyes, she asked the bastards to repeat what they'd just said. Had they admitted to orchestrating the refugees' deaths, all for the measly reward of acquiring relics on the cheap? Undaunted, the harpooner asked what it mattered if they had done it. What could she possibly do about it? But that aside, shouldn't they be talking about her instead? They'd heard she was the only survivor and had sold the relics to Busan for citizenship. How did it feel to sell out her parents' lives for citizenship? Seething with rage, Kana couldn't hold herself back anymore and swung at the harpooner. She drove the broken bottle toward his heart, aiming to kill him in a single strike. Unfortunately, though a bastard, the harpooner wasn't lacking in strength. He effortlessly backhanded the charging Kana, causing her to crash pathetically against the wall. Then with nimble movements, he grabbed her neck, choking her viciously as he dragged her toward him. Grinning sardonically, he told Kana she'd made a grave mistake. Defying a harpooner was a serious offense, one he would gladly elaborate to her. Saying so, he took out handcuffs and quickly bound the poor baddie. With Kana handcuffed and kneeling at their feet, the bastard harpooners threatened her with grim fates. They could choose to execute her on the spot, and no one would bat an eye. That was the difference in status between refugee scum like her and harpooners like them. Not only that, but he wasn't kidding when he said harpooners were the law and executioners of the Busan, so she better get that through her thick skull. Enraged, Kana trembled in fury. Law and executioners? Did they really just say that shit? When the refugees were asking for help, they ignored them. Yet when they were shamelessly stealing their belongings, they called it law? What kind of bullshit was that? As far as she was concerned, they were nothing but a bunch of cowardly bitches. Fuming, the harpooner kicked her in the gut. The blow was so strong that Kana coughed up blood, staining the ground crimson. He wasn't the only one attacking. The rest of the harpooners joined in, working together to jump the poor girl. With a tongue dripping malice, he shouted at Kana to know her place. How dare she insult a noble harpooner? He would definitely beat that rebellion out of her head. Vowing so, he cocked his hand back, ready to deliver a heavy punch. However, just as he was about to let it fly, a hand suddenly shot forward, grabbing his arm. Initially frustrated, his expression quickly changed to one of fear and shock. The one holding him was none other than the big poppy, Tian Ma. Not mincing words with the cowardly trio, Tian immediately chose violence. He spun the lead harpooner like a top, using his body to smack the shit out of the other harpooners. They were all sent flying, crashing pathetically onto the ground or the garbage bins nearby. A truly humiliating scene. As for Kana, she couldn't take her eyes off the brave Tian. She'd known he was strong, but damn, she didn't know he had it like that. Spinning and smacking grown men with just his physical strength was way too exaggerated. Ignoring her ogling eyes, Tian addressed the squirming harpooners. He asked what they were doing bullying a child in the back alleys. Did that make them feel strong? What a bunch of worthless trash. Fuming, the harpooners clapped back with a question of their own. Why the hell was Tian interfering with fellow harpooner business? Was he really siding with a refugee over them? Tian responded condescendingly. Fellow harpooner? Did they even have the right to call themselves that? If they were really harpooners, then why were they beating up a child in the back alleys? The harpooner replied with a furious shout, telling him to mind his own business. Why was he meddling in other people's affairs? It wasn't like he could get some cheeks after all. Enraged, Tian Ma crashed the handle of his walker into the ground. He dared the bastards to repeat what they'd just said. He was keen to see if they had the balls to do so. As he said this, his aura flared, blanketing the alley and scaring the hell out of the cowardly harpooners. Without hesitation, they folded immediately, knowing damn well they didn't want any smoke with the legendary Tian Ma. Though reluctant, they turned to leave, not forgetting to shout empty threats as they departed. They warned Tian to watch his back, otherwise he might just become the next shark bait without realizing it. Unconcerned, Tian watched them go with an unbothered sigh, marveling at their audacity, especially after getting beaten into a retreat. Nevertheless, they weren't his concern anymore, so he quickly turned to the handcuffed Kana, asking if she was all right. Fast forward a couple of hours later, and the duo are seen chopping it up on the ship's hull. Like a concerned big brother, Tian taught Kana about surviving as a citizen on Union Busan. He explained that the experience wasn't so different from struggling to survive on the refugee ship. The only difference was that she'd be going against humans instead of leviathans. In both cases, the weak would be devoured, and only the strong could survive. If she wanted to survive, she had to grow stronger. Kana acknowledged the kind gesture by revealing her own plans. She would become a harpooner. Shocked, Tian asked if she was certain. The harpooner selection process was tough as hell, and most people ended up dropping out halfway. Would she be able to handle it? Kana replied that she would. She would do it even if it killed her. No matter what, she would become a strong harpooner. And once she was, she'd use that power to eradicate every single Leviathan in the world. And so time ticked on, and just like she'd promised, Kana became a harpooner, graduating at the top of her class. During her graduation, she made another vow: to become the kind of harpooner who didn't discriminate between refugees and citizens. A harpooner who served all equally, just like her hero and mentor, Tian motherfucking Ma. Ending the flashback, Kana thought back to her promise to Tian Ma. He'd saved her life, making her indebted to him. Thus, she'd carry that debt until the day she repaid it, to him or to those who came after him, his children. Fondling the sword of massacre, she promised to stay true to her promise. She'd protect the children of her hero, children brought to her by destiny itself, Bota and Lita. Speaking of the children of destiny, they'd fully integrated into life on the Union Busan. As for what that life looked like, it wasn't particularly different from our current zombie society in the modern age. The citizens woke up and worked their asses off, all for the hope of striking it rich and never having to do that shit ever again. Too bad such windfalls don't happen often, so for the time being they had no choice but to work, pay taxes, and struggle to live as decently as possible in the harsh conditions that are the apocalypse. Bota, as a new initiate into society, learned this harsh reality firsthand. Since he didn't have the generational wealth perk unlocked or a rich sugar mama ready to spend cash for his meat, he had no choice but to get a job and grind his way to success the old-fashioned way. Unfortunately, diligence isn't always rewarded. Although he had the drive and desire to work, no one would give him the chance to do so. When he tried getting a job at the scrapyard, the manager took one look at him and said, "Pass." He was way too young and delicate to work there. The job needed immense strength, something he clearly lacked. Not discouraged, Bota crossed the scrapyard off his list of potential options and headed for the next destination: the kitchen. Since it was just a matter of cooking some shit, he figured his scrawny body wouldn't pose much of a hindrance. However, to his surprise, he was met with rejection once again. No refugee was allowed to handle the cooking of food on the Busan. Partly due to bias, and partly because it low-key made sense. What if a resentful refugee got hold of the food and served everyone a healthy dose of laxatives? Wouldn't that be the shit? Pun intended. In any case, he hit a wall with the kitchen, so he moved on to the next location. But just like the experiences before, that one didn't work out either. He got rejected so much that he even contemplated seeking out sugar mommies on the low. Surely massaging wrinkled feet and organizing daily pills couldn't be as hard as the shit he was going through. But upon careful consideration, and tuning out the pervert narrator who's always wilding with stupid ideas, he decided to abandon that route. Gazing to his side, he was surprised to see another business venture: begging. Apparently, even in the apocalypse, there were still those who refused to work. Intrigued and a little sympathetic, Bota drew closer to the woman. After searching through his pockets, he fished out 2 nuts, the tool type, not the one you're thinking about, you pervert, and handed them over to her. She received them with sincere gratitude, clearly not having expected such a windfall that day. Bota noticed this and returned the smile. He told her he was broke as hell right now, so that was all he could afford. But once he got a job and money started flowing in, he'd be sure to give her more. The old woman smiled even brighter at his words, knowing she'd found a cash cow. To not seem entirely selfish, or maybe to genuinely show her gratitude, she decided to hand Bota a gift as well: seeds. These were her most cherished possessions, as they represented hope for a better future. But compared to herself, an old woman on the brink of death, and a young, generous youth who also happened to have a good heart, she felt Bota would be more suitable to carry on that hope. Delighted, Bota readily accepted the seeds. Although he didn't know what the old woman was on about, the word hope still gave him immense strength and confidence. Maybe, just maybe, he would truly be the embodiment of that hope to everyone someday. Reining back his thoughts, he quickly headed back to their humble abode. Once there, he took inventory of their financial religion, and things weren't looking good. The nuts had reduced by more than half, and that was only from a week's spending. If he didn't get a job soon, they'd have to forgo luxuries like the grilled sardines they'd been feasting on lately. Not to mention, food wasn't their only financial burden right now. According to what Kiho said, there were still taxes and contributing to the Busan. If he couldn't do that or find a job, then he and Lita would be kicked off the ship. Sighing, Bota wondered what he could do. It wasn't like he didn't want a job. No one wanted to hire him. In that situation, what the hell was he supposed to do? Glancing at Lita, he informed her that they'd be cutting down on some expenses, specifically grilled sardines. They'd reduce their intake to once a day until he landed a job. Complaining, Lita immediately started crashing out. Did he really expect her to give up grilled sardines? Nah, that was impossible. She vowed to ask Kiho for help. Hopefully, he'd have a better solution for them. Speak of the devil, Kiho coincidentally chose that moment to come check on the kids. He'd only entered halfway through the door when Lita suddenly bombarded him with questions, screaming that they were broke and needed his help. Though surprised, Kiho only took a beat to understand what was going on. He directed his attention to Bota, asking if he'd gotten a job. Upon a negative confirmation, he couldn't help but sigh at his luck. Nevertheless, he held a great fondness for the kids, so he decided to tap into his vast network of influence to help them out. Fast forward a little bit, and we shift to the sub-basement of Union Busan, specifically the plumbing room. Just as promised, Kiho pulled some strings and secured Bota an interview with one of his contacts. However, as in the case with most CVs nowadays, what was promised on paper paled in comparison to what was delivered in person. Bota wasn't the strong, sturdy, top-level young man who could pull bitches, but a scrawny little kid who couldn't flex to save his life. Enraged, the manager turned to Kiho, asking if he was fucking with him. Was he trying to dump another worthless person on him again? Kiho replied that he was mistaken. Although Bota didn't seem strong, he indeed had the strength of 10 oxen. All he was asking for was a chance, for he was sure Bota would make a fantastic plumber. Couldn't he see the guns on him? The kid was born to be a plumber. Taking a moment to consider it, the manager eventually compromised. However, he wasn't going to accept a losing deal. He would test Bota for a day, and only if he passed would he hire him full-time. The duo quickly agreed, knowing this was the best deal they could get. Before leaving, Kiho encouraged Bota to work hard. He then brought up his lessons from before, reminding Bota that on the Busan, the worst sin is poverty. On the seas they had to fear leviathans, but while on the ship the thing to fear most was lacking money. He told Bota to give it his all, as things like poverty, sickness, and a lack of maidens could only be resolved through his own efforts. Bota nodded in understanding before solemnly seeing him off. Once Kiho was gone, it was time to get to work. Receiving his tools, he immediately joined the others in maintaining the ship. Unfortunately, due to his inexperience, he inevitably punctured the wrong pipe and got soaked in a splash of shit. Avoiding his stink, the other plumbers laughed at his misfortune before realizing something was gravely wrong. Based on the blueprints, the pipe he'd punctured wasn't supposed to have waste flowing in it. So what was going on? Approaching the head chief for clarification, the old geezer told him to use his brain. If the pipes didn't match the blueprints, couldn't he simply change the blueprints? Why did he have to explain something so obvious? Addressing the confused Bota, he explained that he wasn't being negligent. The truth was, most of the blueprints were outdated, barely matching the current system of pipes. And to make it worse, they'd been redesigned so much that they no longer matched the original plans from 100 years ago, when the ship was first created. Shocked, Bota wondered if that was true. Had Union Busan really been active for 100 years already? He'd thought their chief was old for having a work experience of 40 years, but who would have thought the ship itself was actually much older? Intrigued, he asked the chief the only thing on his mind. Who had built Union Busan? The chief replied that it had been built by the humans of the past civilization, back when there was still land on Earth. Not only that, but their civilization was known to build structures of even greater grandeur, enough to make the ship look like a joke. Unfortunately, all that went downhill when an ice comet struck the Earth. Despite their advanced technology, they couldn't save the planet from the impact and ended up losing half of the moon. What followed was a great storm that lasted 70 years, leading to the current submerged world. Back then, when the past civilization realized the alarming flooding of the world, they immediately began taking measures, building and lashing ships together to create a giant vessel to support humanity's future. They called this ship Union Busan, signifying their hope to one day return home. And so the ship endured, continuing its great mission for 100 years. Bota listened to the chief's recount in shock and awe. 100 years. Numerous plumbers just like them across many generations, all working together to maintain the Busan, aiding it in its grand mission to one day deliver them back home. How could he not be moved? He suddenly felt an immense sense of pride welling within him. To be part of that mission, to work alongside such great men, he could confidently call it the greatest honor he'd known thus far. Hyping himself up, he vowed to work hard as well. Since the Busan was their home now, he was resolved to give his all to ensure it stayed afloat. He would join the other great men in ensuring their home remained true to its mission for as long as possible, because only then would he and Lita continue having a place to call home. Regrettably, man plans and God laughs. Just as he was about to embark on the greatest adventure of his life, he suddenly noticed something that caught his attention. There was a flood of water by his feet. Before he could piece together what the hell was going on, a pipe suddenly burst behind him, flooding the entire room. Shocked, the chief scrambled to take charge, but things only went downhill from there. When he instructed his men to stop the backflow and clog the pipe, he was informed that the pipe was buried too deep below other pipes for them to access it. They couldn't do anything about it, unless they took apart the entire pipe system from the top. But doing so would only result in more flooding. Fuming, the chief asked who had built such a foolish design. Why would any competent plumber make such an obvious mistake? The plumber replied that he didn't know. All he did was follow the blueprints and perform maintenance. The rest could be answered by someone else. Hearing this, the chief almost exploded in rage. He wanted to rebuke the plumber, but a sudden rumbling from the pipes drew his attention. Before he could react, another pipe burst open, and this time, it was one of the main pipes, causing significant flooding. Worse still, the explosion caused a chain reaction. Soon, other pipes started failing, resulting in even greater explosions and damage throughout the system. Realizing this, the chief could only curse out loud. They were well and truly screwed. Meanwhile, while the boys were fighting for their lives and the general fate of the ship, Lita was back in the room cheerfully watering their new plants. She had just completed a round of thorough cleaning and was waiting on Bota to return so she could show off her stellar work. Just as she was imagining his reaction when he saw how clean the room was, the door was suddenly knocked, drawing her attention. Believing it was Bota, she cheerfully opened the door. However, what greeted her on the other side wasn't her brother, but a trio of unfamiliar faces, clearly radiating malicious intent. Squatting down, the leading figure patted her head and told her she looked just like her mom. The resemblance was uncanny. Naive and delighted, Lita asked if that was true. Did he truly know her mother? The man replied that he did. In fact, he knew her very well. Then, with a smile chilling to the bone, he added that he knew her father as well. Who else could it be but the bastard who'd been folded by Tian Ma? Clearly, he'd taken an L from the father and had sought out the children for revenge. What a bastard.